Chapter 652. Chu Mu once again headed towards the sword puppet's formation, intending to continue his challenge. After paying 100 Tianfeng coins, he received a number plate and waited. It's Chu Mu. Chu Mu is here to challenge the sword puppet's formation again. When Chu Mu approached one of the sword puppet's formation, he was immediately recognized and exclaimed. At this moment, the swordsman who was challenging the sword puppet's formation had only reached the third stage before being defeated. Chu Mu, you go first. Originally, according to the number plate, Chu Mu still needed to wait because there were still 20 swordsmen ahead of him. However, these swordsmen all agreed to let Chu Mu go first. This was because they knew that if they were to challenge the puppet sword formation, they would at most reach the third level and fail. There wasn't much to see. On the contrary, Chu Mu had passed the 5th level's hexagonal sword formation 2 days ago. Last time they didn't see it, but this time they had to take a good look. Chu Mu didn't hold back and directly entered the sword puppet's formation to begin his challenge. First stage of the sword puppet's formation, Yin and Yang sword formation. 2 sword puppets attacked from up and down, left and right, front and back, displaying the full power of the Yin and Yang sword formation. Chu Mu calmly moved his feet and dodged. He didn't use the flying swan phantom steps, so the pressure from the Yin and Yang sword formation was as good as nothing. After experiencing the mysteries of the Yin and Yang sword formation again, his understanding was even deeper. When Chu Mu felt that his comprehension of the duality sword formation had reached its current limit, he instantly struck out with his sword. 2 weak sword lights silently cut off the heads of the 2 sword puppets. After passing the first stage, he entered the second stage. Second stage of the sword puppet's formation, 3 talents sword formation. The pressure from the 3 talents sword formation was twice as strong as the Yin and Yang sword formation. However, to Chu Mu, whose strength had increased by several times, it still couldn't pose the slightest threat. As his feet shifted, Chu Mu unceasingly dodged the 3 talent sword puppet's attacks. He continuously comprehended the 3 talent sword formation until it reached its current limit. Then, he struck out and instantly killed 3 sword puppets, passing the second stage. Chu Mu's strength is even stronger than 2 days ago. Yeah, look at his attack. It's faster, simpler, and sharper than 2 days ago. What a terrifying guy. What kind of monstrous talent is this? The swordsmen who had previously seen Chu Mu charge through the puppet sword formation were all extremely shocked and started discussing amongst themselves. 2 days. In just 2 days, Chu Mu's strength had clearly improved again. Through him breaking through the puppet sword formation, he could clearly feel it. Third stage of the sword puppet's formation. The 4-symbol sword formation was evolved from the 4 sacred beasts, the azure dragon, the white tiger, the vermilion bird, and the black tortoise. It was one of the basic sword formations and was much more profound than the duality sword formation and the tripartite sword formation. Its pressure was also more than twice as strong as the tripartite sword formation. If it was before, Chu Mu would start to feel uncomfortable, but now it was as if nothing had happened. The enormous pressure of the 4-symbol sword formation couldn't affect Chu Mu at all. Calmly and easily dodging through the 4-symbol sword formation and comprehending its mysteries to its current limit, Chu Mu attacked again and easily killed the 4-symbol sword puppets, passing the 3rd stage and entering the 4th stage. 4th stage of the sword puppet's formation. Metal, wood, water, fire, and earth. The attacking styles of the 5 sword puppets were obviously different. Chu Mu began to feel the great pressure of the sword puppet's formation. However, he could only feel it. It was not enough to cause any obvious hindrance to Chu Mu. The first time he challenged the 5 elemental sword formation, Chu Mu was unable to persist for long due to the enormous pressure. Therefore, his comprehension of the 5 elemental sword formation's mysteries was still at a superficial level. Now that his strength had greatly increased, and he could easily resist the pressure of the 5 elemental sword formation, Chu Mu had more time to properly comprehend it. Only when the 5 elemental sword formation's mysteries were comprehended to the limit did Chu Mu attack. He broke through the 5 elemental sword formation and killed the 5 elemental sword puppet. As expected, his strength has increased. Another swordsman sighed. At this time, there were more than 100,000 swordsmen watching. Almost all the swordsmen around the sword puppets formation had run over. 5th stage of the sword puppets formation. The moment the hexagonal sword formation was activated, an enormous pressure descended upon him. Chu Mu felt it very clearly. The enormous pressure came from all directions, from the sky to the ground. It constantly attacked, as if it wanted to crush his body. Fortunately, Chu Mu's sword intent had reached perfection, and his strength had increased several times. His resistance to pressure had also increased greatly. Although the pressure of the sword puppet's formation made him feel uncomfortable, it was still within his range of resistance. Using the flying swan illusory steps, Chu Mu wandered within the sword puppet's formation in a small area, constantly dodging the attacks of the sword puppet. At the same time, he released his powerful spiritual consciousness to feel the mysteries of the sword puppet's formation. Last time, due to the great pressure of the sword puppet's formation, Chu Mu had no choice but to use his full strength to break through the formation with brute force. He did not have the slightest comprehension of the sword puppet's formation. This time, with sufficient strength, Chu Mu had the time to properly comprehend it. 6 directions, heaven, earth, and 4 directions. There were a total of 6 directions, changing unpredictably. His body was like a swimming dragon, graceful and graceful. The great pressure could not slow down Chu Mu because his strength was enough to withstand it. Comprehension, comprehension, comprehension. In Chu Mu's spiritual world, the model of the sword puppet's formation was reflected. All the movements were exactly the same. The mysteries of the sword puppet's formation began to appear in Chu Mu's mind. Chu Mu perceived it more clearly and deeply. Finally, he reached his current limit. Relying on his understanding of the sword puppet's formation, Chu Mu unsheathed the sword of desolation and stabbed the air. Immediately, the operation of the sword puppet's formation slowed down for a moment. It was only 1,000th of a second. It was very short and could not even be described as a blink of an eye. However, for Chu Mu it was enough. The sword that stabbed out smoothly slashed out. The sword was light as if it did not have the slightest bit of strength. It did not look fast at all. In fact, when everyone saw Chu Mu's sword moving in the air, the sword had already cut off the arm of a sword puppet. That was just an illusion. With one of the sword puppets dead, the sword puppet's formation was immediately broken. The pressure was greatly reduced. Chu Mu's speed was faster and more agile. The remaining 5 sword puppets were destroyed by him one by one. He passed. Chu Mu passed the sword puppet's formation again. The last time he passed it, he was in a sorry state. His robe was torn in many places. This time, he passed it so easily. It's really terrifying. The 6th stage of the sword puppet's formation, 7 stars sword formation. This was the sword formation that Chu Mu did not challenge last time because he did not have any confidence. However, this time Chu Mu was confident. The 7 stars sword formation had a total of 7 sword puppet. The 7 stars were the Dubhe star, the Merak star, the Fekta star, the Migres star, the Alioth star, the Mizar star, and the Alcade star. The 7 stars sword puppets did not stand in a circle. Instead, they stood according to the position of the Big Dipper. If one looked down from above, it looked like a spoon. Chu Mu appeared in the middle of the 7 stars sword formation. The 7 stars sword formation immediately opened. The eyes of each sword puppet emitted a different colored light that seemed to contain a trace of star power. Different sword formations had different sword puppet. Only in this way could the sword formation's power be maximized. The 7-star sword puppet moved. It instantly drew its sword and launched an attack at Chu Mu. Chu Mu immediately felt a terrifying pressure that was more than twice the pressure of the hexagonal sword formation on his body. The most important thing was that this pressure did not only target the body. Even the spiritual level was affected. Chu Mu had no choice but to use all his strength to resist the pressure that targeted his body and spiritual level. He suddenly felt like the first time he challenged the sword puppet's formation and faced the pressure of the sword formation. Moreover, the 7 stars sword formation was more profound than the sword formation. Even though Chu Mu's strength had obviously increased compared to before, he still felt powerless in the 7 stars sword formation. I wonder if Chu Mu can pass through the 7 stars sword formation? If he can pass through the 7 stars sword formation, then his strength is enough to be compared to the top 10 official disciples. The reason why they said this was because so far, only the top 10 swordsmen had passed through the 7 stars sword formation. Of course, some swordsmen might have hidden their strength, but there were definitely not many. There were already more than 100,000 onlookers. There were constantly people who wanted to come to the front to watch from a closer distance. They were densely packed and impenetrable. Within the 7 stars sword formation, Chu Mu had some difficulty dodging the attacks of the 7 stars sword puppet. He also had to use his sword to block 1 or 2 attacks that he could not dodge. Gradually, Chu Mu's dodging was not so difficult because he had gradually adapted. This time, the increase in his strength was very obvious. Facing the 7 stars sword formation was not as difficult as facing the sword formation for the first time. Not long after, Chu Mu had comprehended a trace of the 7 stars sword formation, but at this time, he had already used up more than half of his strength. I have to counterattack. Chu Mu quickly dodged and continued to use his sword. Following the trace of comprehension, Chu Mu finally found a flaw in the 7 stars sword formation after using his sword a few times. The flaw flashed and disappeared. The first time, Chu Mu could not catch it. The second time, it was slower by a bit. The third time, Chu Mu finally caught the fleeting flaw and used his sword. The 7 stars sword formation appeared to be sluggish for an instant. Chu Mu immediately erupted with all his strength and used his sword domain to affect the swords of the 7 stars sword puppets, causing them to deviate. Kill. The sword was unbelievably fast, causing the spectating swordsmen to be unable to react in time. The arm of a sword puppet was cut off. This was a good start. Immediately after, the second 7 stars sword puppet was also defeated by Chu Mu. The third, the fourth, when he defeated the 5th sword puppet, he could not dodge in time. The robe on Chu Mu's body had a long hole cut open. The 7 stars sword puppets were all defeated by Chu Mu, and Chu Mu's strength was greatly consumed. He only had less than a fifth of his strength left. In this state, it was simply impossible for him to pass through the 7th stage of the sword formation. Chu Mu could conclude that the pressure was enough to make it difficult for him to move. He would be defeated in an instant, let alone pass through the sword formation. He really passed the 6th stage. Crazy, Chu Mu is going to be the center of attention again. Many swordsmen were either absent-minded or roaring. It was very lively. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 653. Storm. A new storm had formed, and the center of the storm was Chu Mu again. Have you heard? Chu Mu has passed the 6th level of the puppet sword formation. Didn't he just stop at the 5th level? How did he pass the 6th level in just 2 days? He is a genius. Do you know what a genius is? A genius is someone who can do things that ordinary people can't. As for Chu Mu, he left the puppet sword formation area with the 1,500 sky edge coins he had obtained after passing the 6th level. Together with the 400 sky edge coins that Chu Mu still had, he now had 1,900 sky edge coins. It could be said that Chu Mu was the wealthiest among all the swordsmen from the 9 continents. Even the official disciples of the Sky Edge Sword Palace couldn't compare to Chu Mu's Sky Edge coins. After leaving the puppet sword formation area, Chu Mu knew that he wouldn't be coming here for a long time. Unless his strength increased significantly, and he was confident that he could pass the 7th level of the puppet sword formation, he would come again. While walking towards the Sword Tower district, Chu Mu pondered over the use of the 1,900 Sky Edge coins. Now that his sword intent had reached perfection, there seemed to be no need for him to go to the sword cleansing pool anymore. Among all the profounds, only the lacerating profound had reached perfection. The other profounds were still far from perfection, especially the most profound of space. Not to mention perfection, even Deshang was still far from it. Chu Mu couldn't help but think back to what Ji Tianxiang had told him. Profounds depended on their purity, not their quantity. Unless one comprehended one type of profoundness to its true limit, only then would one comprehend a second type of profoundness. Otherwise, multiple types of profoundness would invisibly affect each other, making it difficult for the profoundness to become pure and limiting the power of the profoundness. Chu Mu had comprehended a lot of power Upanishads. He had cultivated 5 of them, but he had never paid attention to the other 4. However, as his realm increased, his understanding of the other 4 increased little by little. Thus, it had slowed down Chu Mu's comprehension of power Upanishads, which made it harder for him to purify them. Chu Mu, you are finally back. Instructor Ji Tianxiang sent someone to pass on a message for you to look for him. Outside the sword tower, Jiang Chuan was looking around. When he saw Chu Mu, he quickly rushed over and said, "The instructor is looking for me. I'll go right away." Chu Mu came back to his senses, quickly turned around, and strode towards Ji Tianxiang's residence at an extremely fast speed. "Good boy. In just 2 short days your strength has increased so much. You went from barely passing the 5th stage to barely passing the 6th stage. Your sword intent and one of the profundities should have reached perfection, right?" Ji Tianxiang could not help but speak first when he saw Chu Mu. His face was full of smiles. "I just reached perfection not long ago. I have some questions in my heart," Chu Mu said. Ji Tianxiang was a very good person to ask for advice. "Go ahead." Ji Tianxiang seemed to have already prepared for this. "Instructor, it's about power Upanishad. According to the instructor, only after comprehending a power Upanishad to the true limit would one be able to comprehend a second power Upanishad. In that case, isn't perfection Upanishad the true limit?" Chu Mu asked the question that was in his heart. "Limit? What is the limit?" Ji Tianxiang asked back with a smile. Without waiting for Chu Mu to answer, he continued, "Everyone's limit is different. It is related to one's mental will, body strength, potential, and so on. It is very complicated. To put it simply, the limit is the threshold that one can reach in a certain period of time. Once all the potential of that period is squeezed out, there is nothing left. That is the limit." Chu Mu listened. He understood the meaning of limit. To swordsmen with mediocre talent, reaching 100% perfection in their profound is the limit. However, to swordsmen with outstanding talent, reaching 100% perfection in their profound is an end point, as well as a new starting point. Ji Tianxiang said seriously. Chu Mu was slightly surprised, and his expression became even more focused. "You should know that there are many kinds of talent. There are cultivation talents, comprehension talents, spiritual talents, combat talents, and so on. Different talents will have different performances." Ji Tianxiang said neither slowly nor hurriedly, "This time we will only talk about spiritual talent. Spiritual talent originates from the soul, so spiritual talent is also called spiritual talent. In this world, there are countless living beings. Take us, the human race, as an example. Some people are born with stronger souls than ordinary people. Their perception is also stronger than ordinary people. These people are considered as people with soul talent. Ji Tianxiang looked at Chu Mu, his eyes twinkling. For example, you, Chu Mu. I can tell that your soul is stronger than the average swordsman. You are a person with soul talent. Chu Mu was not surprised. The soul is the most mysterious existence in this world. It is unfathomable. Until now, our ancestors have put in a lot of effort on the soul, but the result was very little. Just like those soul cultivation methods, in fact, these methods can't really increase one's soul strength. The reason why some people feel their soul strength increase after practicing soul cultivation methods is because the potential of their soul has been developed. Cultivating soul cultivation techniques is secondary to developing the potential of the soul. The main thing is to increase the strength of the soul, making the soul purer. Naturally, the spirit will also become purer and stronger. Let me give you a brief introduction, and focus on the connection between soul talent and profound. The sword intent and profound that a swordsman comprehends are closely related to the soul. Let me give you an example. Ji Tianxiang pondered for 10 breaths. After organizing his thoughts, he continued, for example, if a normal swordsman's soul talent is 0, then after he comprehends the sword intent, he can only comprehend one profound and raise it to the limit. He cannot comprehend the second profound because his soul power cannot support it. For example, if a swordsman's soul talent is 1, then after comprehending sword intent and one type of profound to the limit, he can still comprehend a second type of profound to the limit, but he cannot comprehend a third type of profound. Do you understand what I'm saying? Ji Tianxiang finished speaking and stared at Chu Mu as he asked. Chu Mu nodded to show that he understood. The performance of soul talent is not only that. No matter if it is the sword intent or profound, after reaching perfection, we will give a new level of concentration. 9 turns of sword intent and 9 turns of profound. As the name suggests, after reaching perfection in the sword intent and profound, the quantity cannot be increased, but the quality can be improved. Using the example just now, a swordsman with 0 soul talent will reach his limit after reaching perfection in the sword intent and profound. A swordsman with 1 soul talent can continue to cultivate until he reaches the true limit, which is the first turn of sword intent or first turn of profound. A swordsman with 2 soul talent will reach perfection in the sword intent and profound, and the limit will be the second turn. Of course, because the soul is too mysterious, there is no effective way to measure a swordsman's soul power. Your sword intent and 1 profound have both reached perfection. I don't know how powerful your soul power is, but based on your performance, I guess it shouldn't be low. Perhaps you can refine your sword intent and profound to the 3rd or even 4th revolution. Then, instructor, how should I refine my sword intent and profound? Chu Mu asked. Also, is there a deeper meaning to refining sword intent and profound? Good question, I will answer you one by one. Ji Tianxiang nodded, a look of admiration flashing across his face. The realm after the origin realm is the God condensation realm. Sword Saint is the 2nd realm of Sword Dao, and the 3rd realm is the Sword of Gojoseon. Reaching the God condensation realm does not mean you can become a Sword of Gojoseon. In fact, only by refining sword intent and profound to the first turn can you become a Sword of Gojoseon. The more profound you refine them, the further you can go on the path of becoming a Sword of Gojoseon. It is said that a swordsman who can refine his sword intent and profound to the 7th turn or above is almost guaranteed to become a sword saint. Ji Tianxiang's voice contained traces of envy and yearning. On the ancient sword continent, Chu Mu did not have such a clear understanding of it. Of course, there are very few people who can refine their sword to the 7th turn, and even fewer above that. In the history of our human race, there has never been a terrifying existence who could refine their sword to the 9th turn. It is not necessary to refine one to the 7th turn to become a sword saint. Currently, most of the sword saints in our human race have only refined their sword to the 5th turn or 6th turn. Because of their hard work and fortuitous encounters, they can also become sword saints. Talent does not represent everything. Unwavering hard work is the most important. Ji Tianxiang said seriously, a true powerhouse is made up of 1% talent and 99% hard work. However, those with talent, with hard work, can often go further than ordinary people. Let me give you a suggestion. Go to the sword horde and choose a mind-tempering technique to refine your mind and increase its strength. Then, go to the second level of the sword horde and choose the 9-turn heart seal technique. It is a technique specifically used to refine sword intent and profound. Ji Tianxiang suggested, I remember that the 9-turn heart seal technique costs 1,000 sky edge coins. Do you have enough? Yes. Chu Mu said. Fortunately, he did not go to the profound sky wall to spend the sky edge coins. Otherwise, it would be troublesome. Ji Tianxiang changed the topic with a smile and said, Okay, after talking so much, I still haven't told you the real reason I called you here. Chu Mu showed an expression of listening attentively. The head instructor has set a goal for you. The smile on Ji Tianxiang's face disappeared as he sternly said, Other than passing the Venerable Sword examination within half a year, the head instructor was very surprised when he heard about your progress. Therefore, he told me to tell you that if you become the number 1 official disciple before passing the Venerable Sword examination, he will give you an additional reward. In my opinion, I hope you can give it a try because the head instructor does not make promises easily. The reward he mentioned must be extraordinary. Ji Tianxiang said. Number 1 official disciple. Chu Mu's heart was moved. His eyes shone with a sharp light as he pointed his sword at the throne. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Qidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 654. Chu Mu had already completed the mind-tempering technique. After leaving Ji Tianxiang's residence, Chu Mu went directly to the Sword Horde district. As soon as he entered the Sword Horde district, Chu Mu felt the pressure again. It was sharp and heavy, with the heavy vicissitudes of history and a strong aura of books. It was the aura of many secret skills accumulated over a long period of time. However, Chu Mu's strength had improved so much compared to before that this kind of pressure could not affect him in the slightest. After entering the first level of the Sword Horde, the pressure suddenly increased. Before, Chu Mu had to struggle to withstand it, but now, he could resist it easily. The first level of the Sword Horde did not have the skills that Chu Mu needed, so he went directly to the second level. The second level was the same as the first. Countless light balls floated in the air like stars. The aura of each light ball was more than twice as strong as that of the first level. Combined, the pressure of the second level of the Sword Horde was more than twice as strong as that of the first level of the Sword Horde. This was because the skills recorded in the second level of the Sword Horde were of a higher level than that of the first level. The pressure was enormous. If it was the first time Chu Mu had entered the Sword Horde region, he definitely wouldn't have been able to bear it and would have had to leave immediately. However, although he felt an enormous pressure crushing his entire body and every part of his body was bearing a terrifying pressure, it was still within his tolerance range. Chu Mu's purpose was to find the 9 revolutions heart seal technique that Ji Tianxiang had mentioned. Ji Tianxiang had also told Chu Mu how to quickly identify the 9 revolutions heart seal technique among the many skills. Using the characteristic method that Ji Tianxiang had mentioned, Chu Mu spread out his spiritual consciousness, multitasking, and quickly searched. After the tempering of the mind-tempering technique and the teacher-in-chief's cup of wine, his spiritual consciousness was 4 times purer. Multitasking was easier and more convenient. Not long after, Chu Mu found a floating light ball. The aura it emitted was the same as what Ji Tianxiang had said. That's you. Chu Mu immediately locked onto the light ball. With a move of his mind, the light ball naturally flew to Chu Mu. A brief introduction of the skills in the light ball was also transmitted to Chu Mu's mind. 9 transformations heart seal. Chu Mu grabbed the ball of light and placed it between his eyebrows. At the same time, he took out 1,000 sky edge coins. As soon as the coins appeared, they disappeared. As for Chu Mu, he sensed that the ball of light between his eyebrows seemed to have unlocked some sort of restriction. Waves of information flowed into his mind. 9 transformations heart imprint. 9 transformations of mind. A quarter of an hour later, the ball of light automatically flew away from Chu Mu. The information contained within the ball of light had all been transmitted into Chu Mu's mind. Chu Mu remained motionless for another quarter of an hour before he opened his eyes. He turned around and walked to the first floor. He left the Sword Horde district and strode toward the Sword Tower district. The number 1 official disciple. Chu Mu pondered over Ji Tianxiang's words as he walked. The current number 1 official disciple was Xikong Zhan. If he wanted to become the number 1 official disciple, he naturally had to defeat Xikong Zhan. Xikong Zhan, I'm afraid that his sword intent and ultimacy have already reached perfection. Moreover, he has also cultivated the 9 transformations heart seal. I wonder how many transformations he has reached? Chu Mu secretly guessed. It was definitely not the first transformation. Chu Mu felt that among the 2 million official disciples, there should be quite a number of disciples who had refined their sword intent and ultimacy to the first transformation level. Then the second transformation? It should be more than that. At least the third transformation. This was Chu Mu's intuition. He was not sure if it was accurate, but he felt that Xikong Zhan's sword intent and ultimacy should have been refined to the third transformation level, or at least the third transformation. In this case, if Chu Mu wanted to defeat Xikong Zhan, he would have to refine his sword intent and tearing ultimacy to the third transformation level. Currently, he had not started cultivating the 9 transformations heart seal. His sword intent and ultimacy had only reached perfection. Chu Mu did not know if he could achieve the goal set by the teacher-in-chief before he passed the Sword Venerable's exam and became an elite disciple. This was a challenge to himself. Such a challenge was extremely difficult. It was even somewhat impossible. However, it was also because of this that Chu Mu's fighting spirit was ignited in the depths of his heart. In essence, he was a person who didn't want to be left out. He longed for challenges, difficult challenges. Only then could his potential be completely ignited. Chu Mu, I've been waiting for you for a long time. A voice suddenly sounded, blowing like a gust of wind into Chu Mu's ears. Chu Mu turned his head and saw a figure standing on the sword battle arena not far away. The figure was as straight as a sword, and its sharpness was extremely shocking. This person had long hair that draped over his shoulders and covered half of his face. Under the long hair, his eyes were sparkling and extremely sharp. Even from dozens of meters away, Chu Mu could feel the sharpness in his eyes. "What's the matter?" Chu Mu asked indifferently. "My name is Jiang Bieli, the 6th General under Lord Xikong Zhan. I am here to experience it." The young man with long hair spoke with an indifferent tone. He slowly drew his sword and pointed it at Chu Mu from dozens of meters away. Traces of sharpness condensed into a line and shot through the air towards Chu Mu, causing Chu Mu's body to tremble slightly. Very strong. Chu Mu's eyes contracted as he muttered to himself. He didn't reject and leaped onto the sword battle arena, facing Jiang Bieli. "Draw your sword." Jiang Bieli's tone was still indifferent. "I will draw my sword when it's time to do so," Chu Mu replied. Jiang Bieli's figure moved, and his spine was like a dancing dragon. A terrifying power burst out in an instant, and his entire body was like an arrow released from the bow, shooting towards Chu Mu. In just a blink of the eye, Jiang Bieli's figure had traversed dozens of meters. He thrust his sword light silently and weakly. Chu Mu's eyes reflected Jiang Bieli's figure. He instantly approached and thrust his sword, which was less than an inch away from Chu Mu. He poured in his strength and burst it out. This sword showed that Jiang Bieli's control of his strength had reached a profound level, and he wasn't far from the entry stage. At the same time, Jiang Bieli's sword intent and quintessence of the wind had been tempered to the first transition, which was even more profound than Chu Mu's. Jiang Bieli's sword burst out with strength, causing the wind and thunder to stir. It was extremely tyrannical and earth-shattering. However, Chu Mu didn't move an inch and didn't draw his sword. He just waited for Jiang Bieli's sword to tear apart his protective sword aura. Danger! It was unknown when a group of spectators had gathered around the sword contest arena, but all of them were trembling with fear. In the blink of an eye, Chu Mu's sword was unsheathed. Everyone could only faintly see a blurry sword light which appeared silently. That weak sword light seemed to have swept past Jiang Bieli's body, and before that, there seemed to be the sound of wind and thunder. Following a bang, Jiang Bieli's figure flew backwards at an even faster speed. He vomited a mouthful of blood in midair, which splashed down like rain. Chu Mu's sword was still in the scabbard, as though the blurry sword light was just an illusion. One sword. With just one sword, Chu Mu had defeated the 6th general of Xikongzhan's 13 generals. Entering the entry stage with the perfected sword intent and quintessence is indeed terrifyingly tyrannical. Chu Mu looked at Jiang Bieli, who was sent flying, and took 2 steps back. He had used a slap on Jiang Bieli's chest earlier. If he had used a slash, Jiang Bieli would have been injured. Of course, it was difficult for such a slash to kill an expert like Jiang Bieli. At most, it would only injure him. But that was enough. In just 1 or 2 months, Chu Mu's strength had increased by leaps and bounds. It was truly a miracle. Jiang Bieli barely stood at the edge of the sword contest arena and stabilized his body. His left hand was touching his chest that was struck by Chu Mu's sword. Waves of pain spread throughout his body, and his face was pale while a trace of blood could be seen at the corner of his mouth. "You are incredible!" Jiang Bieli's tone was filled with difficulty and was filled with shock. He originally thought that no matter how incredible Chu Mu was, he wouldn't be much stronger than him. He might not even be a match for him. He didn't expect for him to be defeated by a single sword. What Jiang Bieli didn't know was that in terms of combat talent, Chu Mu was far superior to him. He had always been adept at defeating stronger opponents. Even if his sword intent and quintessence were stronger than Chu Mu, it was still useless. What's more, Chu Mu had grasped the entry stage. The instantaneous burst of power wasn't any weaker than him. "I am not a match for you, but someone will defeat you," Jiang Bieli said. After consuming the elixir, his face regained its color. He left behind a statement and jumped off the sword contest arena. "Wait!" Chu Mu called out to Jiang Bieli. "Go back and tell Xikongzhan that I will challenge him within half a year." "What?" Jiang Bieli heard and quickly turned around. His eyes bulged out as he stared blankly at Chu Mu. He thought he was hallucinating. The surrounding swordsmen were all stunned as well. They widened their eyes and had an expression of disbelief. What did Chu Mu just say? "It seems like," he said, "he wants to challenge Xikongzhan within half a year. Give me a slap and see if I am dreaming." As expected, there was a pause sound as that swordsman's face was swollen from the slap. "Humph, truly arrogant and conceited." Jiang Bieli came back to his senses and confirmed that he wasn't hallucinating. He instantly sneered and looked at Chu Mu with disdain. "Lord Xikongzhan's strength is unfathomable. Even if the 13 of us generals worked together to set up the sword formation, we still wouldn't be a match for him. You might have defeated me, but you are incomparable to Lord Xikongzhan. The difference is like heaven and earth. You actually want to challenge Lord Xikongzhan. Whether I am arrogant or not, that is my business. You just have to pass my words to Xikongzhan." Chu Mu spoke indifferently. I will pass on the message, but I don't know if Lord Sikongjan will bother about you. Jiang Bieli spoke coldly and left with large strides. Chu Mu's face flashed with a smile as he walked down the sword contest stage and headed towards the Sword Tower district. He could foresee that there would be a storm among the official disciples of the Sky Edge Sword Palace, and the center of the storm would undoubtedly be him. When he said that he wanted to challenge Sikongjan within half a year, it was truly too shocking and would definitely be deemed as an arrogant act by many. But how could they understand Chu Mu's inner thoughts? To be continued. If you like this work, I welcome you to come to Chidien.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 655. What did you say? When the number 1 general, Fei Kong, heard Jiang Bieli's words, his eyes widened and his face was filled with astonishment. He thought he was hallucinating. The other generals present were also astonished. Sixth brother, are you sure you aren't talking in your sleep? The 7th general asked. Sixth brother, is that really what Chu Mu said? The 2nd general asked in disbelief. Jiang Bieli didn't feel unhappy. It wasn't because his brothers didn't believe him, but because this matter was too unbelievable. Putting himself in their shoes, if it was any other general who brought back this news, he would also find it unbelievable. After Jiang Bieli's repeated affirmation, the other generals finally believed it. Presumptuous, truly presumptuous. He thinks he has some strength and actually wants to challenge Lord Sikongjan. He doesn't know that his strength is far from Lord Sikongjan's. The 3rd general sneered while his eyes were filled with disdain for Chu Mu. To be able to defeat 6th brother in a single sword, it means that this Chu Mu's strength is indeed not bad. From what I know, when he first arrived at the Sky Edge Sword Palace, his strength was 10 times weaker than now. The number 1 general, Fei Kong, laughed and said, in just 1 or 2 months, his strength has improved by leaps and bounds. He is indeed a prodigy. But the current him is too arrogant and overconfident. He is blinded by reality and thinks that he can improve his strength to the point where he can go against Lord Sikongjan in half a year. Even we don't know what level Lord Sikongjan's strength is at now. We can only be sure that as time passes, Lord Sikongjan will constantly become stronger. Lord Sikongjan will definitely be even stronger in half a year. The 7th general said, This Chu Mu is truly presumptuous to the extreme. It seems like we were right not to recruit him successfully. We, the generals, don't need those arrogant and conceited people who don't know their limit. The 2nd general said, Big brother, what about this news? Should we inform Lord Sikongjan? Jiang Bieli asked. Of course, we have to inform Lord Sikongjan. Fei Kong laughed and said, But Lord Sikong is currently in seclusion and will only come out in 1 or 2 months. We will inform him then. But before that, I want to meet this presumptuous and conceited person. The 3rd general squinted his eyes and spoke softly. Have you heard? Chu Mu actually spoke conceited nonsense, threatening to challenge Sikongjan within half a year. I've heard about it long ago. This Chu Mu is indeed a genius. Unfortunately, he is too arrogant and doesn't have a clear understanding of himself. He has been blinded by his recent rapid improvement in strength. Ignorance is truly terrifying. After the news of Chu Mu threatening to challenge Sikongjan within half a year spread out, almost all the swordsmen thought that Chu Mu was too arrogant. He actually wanted to challenge Sikongjan, who had held the number 1 position for 4 to 5 years in just half a year. One had to know that over a year ago, the 2nd-ranked swordsman had been easily defeated by Sikongjan. Even some elite disciples had been defeated by Sikongjan. Amongst the official disciples of the Sky Edge Sword Palace, who could compare to Sikongjan, Sikongjan was number 1 amongst the official disciples and was the strongest. This point was already deeply ingrained in everyone's hearts. It wasn't a blind belief, but rather the fact that Sikongjan had used his tyrannical strength to defeat challengers time and time again. It had formed an impression that was deeply imprinted in everyone's hearts. In the past year, many swordsmen had challenged the top 100 disciples, but no one had ever challenged Zhang. The difference in strength was too great. If one were to be easily defeated by Zhang, it would only be asking for humiliation. Chu Mu's words had set off a storm amongst the official disciples of the Sky-Edge Sword Palace. Many instructors were first startled when they heard the news, but after some understanding, they laughed. They believed that Chu Mu couldn't possibly be Zhang's match. Most likely, he would add luster to Zhang's legend. There was only one exception, and that was Ji Tianxiang. "Good kid, you are indeed bold." Ji Tianxiang secretly laughed when he heard the news. "Chu Mu, is the news outside true? I heard that you are going to challenge Zhang within half a year?" Jiang Chuan hurriedly asked. His face was filled with shock and indescribable excitement. Even he didn't know what was going on in his heart. "Yes." Chu Mu nodded. "Sure enough, it's true. Do you know that it's already spread like wildfire outside? Many people are saying that you're overestimating yourself, that you're arrogant and conceited, and that you haven't clearly recognized reality. They say that you're absolutely not a match for Zhang. We will see when the time comes." Chu Mu faintly smiled. "Good, it's good that you are confident. I also have confidence in you. I believe that you can do it." Jiang Chuan clenched his fists and said excitedly. He could even imagine the scene of Chu Mu defeating Zhang. How shocking would that be? At that time, who would dare to laugh at swordsmen from small worlds like them? Who would dare to say that they were inferior to swordsmen from the ancient world? Chu Mu smiled. He returned to his room and began cultivating, while Jiang Chuan remained in the hall. Zhang is extremely powerful. Chu Mu is definitely not his match right now. In half a year, Chu Mu's strength will continue to increase, but Zhang will not remain in the same place. It will definitely be a difficult battle, Jiang Chuan secretly thought. However, I hope that Chu Mu can win. Although he subconsciously felt that the chances of Chu Mu defeating Zhang were very, very low, as someone who came from the same continent as Chu Mu, Jiang Chuan still stood on Chu Mu's side. The swordsmen from the ancient sword continent all stood on Chu Mu's side, regardless of the outcome. As a result, conflicts could be seen everywhere. They were basically conflicts between swordsmen from the ancient sword continent and swordsmen from the ancient world. The reason for these conflicts was the rumor that Chu Mu had declared that he would challenge Zhang within half a year. They would first quarrel, and then it would often evolve into a battle arena. However, in most cases, it was the swordsmen from the ancient sword continent who lost. However, the conflicts were still there, and there seemed to be signs of them becoming more and more intense. Chu Mu did not care about any of this. He did not go to the sword cleansing pool or the profound sky wall. He stayed in the sword tower all day long, either practicing his sword arts on the first floor, using his sword domain, mountain quaking force, and other power control techniques, or refining the Tianhuang sword essence in his room to make it purer. Then he would cultivate the heaven-seizing technique and the 9 revolutions heart seal. Almost every moment, Chu Mu had things to do. His schedule was full. At this moment, Chu Mu was sitting on the bed in his room, his hands forming a strange hand seal. The 9 revolutions heart seal was a special technique that was created to refine sword intent and profound. It was composed of 2 aspects. The first was the mental cultivation method, and the second was the hand seal. The cultivation of the 9 revolving heart seal technique was similar to the mind tempering skill. However, it required the cooperation of hand seals and the mobilization of the mind to refine the sword intent or the power of Upanishad in a special way to achieve the goal of making the sword intent and the power of Upanishad purer. The most important step in cultivating the 9 revolutions heart seal was to condense the hand seal. The condensation of the hand seal had to be very precise, without the slightest difference, or it would be ineffective. As for whether the hand seal was successfully condensed, it was also very simple. After condensing the hand seal, one only needed to silently recite the mental cultivation method. If the mental cultivation method could run smoothly, it meant that the hand seal was successfully condensed. Otherwise, it was a failure and one needed to continue to adjust. When ordinary swordsmen began to cultivate the 9 revolutions heart seal, they often needed a month or even longer to condense the correct hand seal. Those with good talent would need half a month. The more powerful ones would need 6 or 7 days, and even the more powerful ones would need a day. However, Chu Mu only needed to try a few times after comprehending the 9 revolutions heart seal before successfully condensing the correct hand seal. The whole time did not exceed 60 breath. If news of his speed spread, it would cause a new round of storms. After condensing the first hand seal of the 9 revolutions heart seal with both hands, the distracting thoughts in Chu Mu's mind naturally disappeared. His mind silently recited the mental cultivation method of the 9 revolutions heart seal. Suddenly, the mind power in the spiritual world was mobilized and moved toward the embryonic form of the sword. The sword intent existed in the embryonic form of the sword. The mobilized mind power surrounded the embryonic form of the sword in a strange way. Then, the mind power washed the embryonic form of the sword like a river and began to refine the sword intent in the embryonic form of the sword. It was like running water washing a stone in the water, constantly removing the impurities in the stone and gradually turning it into a crystal. However, the efficiency was too low and the time taken was too long. It was a long-term work. After finishing the cultivation, Chu Mu frowned slightly. He knew that the efficiency of cultivating the 9 revolutions heart seal was directly related to the strength of one's mind power. The stronger one's mind power was, the higher the efficiency of the refinement and the faster it would reach the first revolution. The weaker one's mind power was, the lower the efficiency of the refinement and the longer it would take to reach the first revolution. My mind power is many times stronger than the average swordsman's. Based on my efficiency, it would probably take me a month to reach the first revolution if I spend 4 hours a day refining the sword intent, Chu Mu thought. To others, refining the sword intent to the first revolution in a month was a very fast speed. After all, an ordinary swordsman would need at least a year. However, Chu Mu had declared that he would challenge Sikongjian in half a year. In fact, he could not wait for half a year because the teacher-in-chief had said that he would pass the sword venerable examination within half a year. Now, more than a month had passed and there were still more than 4 months left. In other words, he had to have the ability to defeat Sikongjian within 4 months. Presumably, Sikongjian's sword intent and profound should have both reached the 3rd revolution. Chu Mu wanted to reach the 3rd revolution level in just 4 months. With his current refining speed, it seemed impossible. After reaching the 1st revolution, it would take even longer to refine to the 2nd revolution. It might take twice the time. As such, there was not enough time and he had to think of a way. A thought flashed through Chu Mu's mind while he was thinking. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 656. Chu Mu thought of a method. If he succeeded, he could indeed reach the first turn in sword intent and profound meaning in a shorter period of time. The power of vibration. Yes, Chu Mu thought of the power of vibration. The mountain quake energy was a kind of vibration power. However, this was not the origin of Chu Mu's inspiration, but the sky-shaking energy fusing sword forging technique. Yes, the essence of the sky-shaking energy fusing sword forging technique was in vibration and fusion. However, because it was only the upper part, which only had the essence of vibration, Chu Mu finally perfected the fusion part through personal cultivation and comprehension. It became a sword forging technique that was different from the orthodox sky-shaking energy fusing sword forging technique. He remembered that when he first obtained the sky-shaking energy-fusing sword forging technique, he comprehended it. When he accepted the inheritance, his spiritual consciousness became purer after each vibration. Since that was the case, why not use a similar method to vibrate the embryonic form of the sword soul and make the sword intent in it purer? However, it was not easy to control one's mind to form a high-frequency oscillation. It was also a challenge. Chu Mu immediately began to study. After a day, Chu Mu found that it was not difficult to make his spiritual consciousness vibrate. However, the frequency of the vibration was not enough to form an effective impact on the embryonic form of the sword soul. Naturally, he could not refine the sword intent. He continued to think and study. The 9-turn heart seal technique is divided into 2 parts, the handprint and the mental cultivation method. The handprint leads the mental cultivation method and finally effectively refine the profound meaning of sword intent. Since that's the case, why don't I start from these 2 aspects and combine them with the power of vibration? With a clue, it was easier to study and comprehend. Little did they know that Chu Mu was doing something that shocked countless people. It had to be known that the 9-cycle heart seal was created by the many sword cultivators of the immemorial world after a long period of time. Then, it was slowly improved by many people over a long period of time, until it became a complete cultivation method. Although the 9 revolutions heart imprint in the Sky Edge Sword Palace was only the most widespread and basic one, it was the culmination of countless people's hard work. For example, the special cultivation methods that other large organizations possessed to refine the mysteries of sword intent had evolved from the 9 revolutions heart imprint. However, the special cultivation methods of the major forces were basically improved after a long period of research by the geniuses or many people in their forces. Chu Mu was now doing such a difficult thing. Changing the hand seal was a very difficult task. It required many experiments. Chu Mu changed his hand seals little by little on the basis of the original hand seals. He would carefully experience each hand seal, feel the differences between them, and firmly remember them. His powerful soul once again played a role. For the entire day, Chu Mu was improving his hand seals. He clearly remembered that he had already changed 36,000 hand seals. Each hand seal looked almost the same, but there were very subtle differences, such as the distance between the fingers and so on. Time slowly passed. Chu Mu was completely immersed in it, and he was not tired at all. Jiang Chuan knew that Chu Mu was definitely cultivating with all his strength to improve his strength in preparation for the challenge against Xikong Zhan. Therefore, he did not disturb Chu Mu. In the blink of an eye, another 2 days passed. During this time, Chu Mu had tried more than 100,000 hand seals, but none of them were successful. However, Chu Mu did not feel disheartened. This was because the failure of these 100,000 hand seals had brought him a lot of enlightenment. He had a premonition that he would soon be able to find the correct method of forming hand seals and condense the most accurate hand seals. For 3 consecutive days, Chu Mu's mind was almost completely exhausted. He quickly stopped and circulated the mind-tempering technique to recover his mind. When his mind had recovered to its peak, Chu Mu continued to try. Failure after failure brought Chu Mu closer to success. Once again, he condensed the hand seals. When the hand seals were condensed, Chu Mu suddenly felt his mind vibrating at a terrifying frequency. Chu Mu quickly coordinated with his mental cultivation method and mobilized his mind. When the hand seals changed, the mental cultivation method also changed. It was much simpler than changing the hand seals. Under the high-speed vibrations, his mind once again surrounded the fledgling sword soul. The vibrations were like hammers constantly hammering the fledgling sword soul. It was a rhythmic hammering, and the power surged into the fledgling sword soul along with the vibrations, tempering the sword intent. The tempering efficiency had more than doubled compared to before. Not enough. It's not perfect yet. If it's perfect enough, I believe it can increase the efficiency again, Chu Mu said to himself with an excited look on his face. This was the look of someone who had overcome a difficult problem. Chu Mu continued to study and perfect it. This might take some time, but Chu Mu firmly believed that sharpening the knife would not delay the work of cutting firewood. Only when the knife was sharpened well, cutting firewood would be easier and more efficient. After another day, Chu Mu finally perfected the first hand seal. The efficiency had increased by a lot. The current 9 reincarnation heart seal is different from before. In that case, I'll change it to 9 reincarnation heavenly shocking seal, Chu Mu said with a smile. Since the first hand seal had been perfected, it was time to refine it. After condensing the hand seals and circulating the mental cultivation method, his mind surrounded the fledgling sword soul and began to vibrate at a high frequency. The frequency of the vibrations was well controlled. If it was too weak, it could not be refined. If it was too strong, it would damage the fledgling sword soul. Under the vibrations, Chu Mu could feel that the sword essence was becoming purer. Very quickly, 4 hours had passed and Chu Mu had finished his cultivation. At this speed, I might not need 10 days to refine the sword essence ultimacy to the first turn, Chu Mu said to himself. Since the sword essence had been refined and his mind was restored, Chu Mu began to refine the tearing ultimacy. The way he did it was the same. He surrounded the tearing ultimacy with his mind and then vibrated it at a high frequency, as if he was forging iron. Perhaps because there were too many ultimacies and they affected each other, the refining efficiency of the tearing ultimacy was obviously not as good as the sword essence. Chu Mu had no choice. This was already the fastest refining speed. Next, Chu Mu spent 8 hours refining the sword essence and ultimacy power every day. He took another 4 hours to study and improve the second-hand seal. The rest of the time was spent on swordsmanship, studying the field of swordsmanship, power control, mountain shaking energy and other force exertion technique. He also took some time to practice the Tianhuang sword classic. His days were very leisurely. Today was the 7th day since Chu Mu modified the 9-turn heart print technique into the 9-turn heavenly shocking print technique. Chu Mu was using his mind to refine the sword essence. Under the high-frequency vibrations, the embryonic form of the sword essence kept vibrating. The sword essence contained in it was refined and purified again and again until it finally reached a limit. Then, Chu Mu immediately felt that the sword essence was different. It had a completely new feeling. This is the first turn sword essence? Chu Mu stopped refining and carefully felt the sword essence at this time. He was surprised. The sword essence had successfully reached the first turn. There was no change in the quantity, but the quality had doubled. In other words, the purity of the sword essence had doubled. The increase in the strength of the sword essence was very obvious. Especially for people like Chu Mu who were good at defeating the strong, this kind of increase in absolute power would make his strength increase significantly. The sword essence has reached the first turn. In a few days, the ultimacy should also reach the first turn. At that time, the second-hand seal should be almost completed. The 9-turn heart print technique had a total of 9 hand seals and a mental cultivation method. Each hand seal corresponded to a turn. For example, the first hand seal would be used for the first turn, the second hand seal would be used for the second turn, and so on. Since Chu Mu had changed the first hand seal of the 9-turn heart print technique and the refining efficiency had soared, the second-hand seal must also be changed. Not only the second-hand seal, but also the third, fourth, fifth, up to the 9th-hand seal. However, the first-hand seal was the simplest. The second-hand seal was relatively complex and more difficult to change. After recovering his mind, he began to refine the tearing ultimacy. After that, he would recover his mind. After the sword essence reached the first turn, Chu Mu was in a good mood. He left the bedroom and walked down the sword tower. When he came to the first floor, he drew his sword and began to practice his swordsmanship. he tried to infuse the first turn sword essence into his sword. Every time he waved his sword, it became sharper and more powerful. If he used his power to control it, it would definitely be more terrifying. When the ultimacy reaches the first turn, I will definitely be able to pass the 6th level of the puppet sword formation easily. As for the 7th level, Chumu thought for a while. He was not confident. The puppet sword formation was getting stronger with each level. He did not know how difficult the 7th level would be. However, if the sword essence reached the first turn and the tearing ultimacy reached the first turn, he could give it a try. This thought flashed across Chumu's mind. He focused on practicing his swordsmanship. His mind was completely immersed in the swordsmanship. Chumu practiced the most basic swordsmanship as if he was meditating in the sword-cleansing pool. He practiced from the most basic swordsmanship. He practiced the subtle changes over and over again. It was as if he was experiencing the process of practicing his swordsmanship since he was born. It was a pure swordsmanship. There was no sword essence, ultimacy, or sword art field. As he practiced, Chumu subconsciously used the mountain quake energy. Every time he waved his sword, the sword would vibrate at a high frequency. It could not be seen by the naked eye. Even the ears could not hear the sound because the speed of the vibration had far exceeded the speed of sound. Unknowingly, Chumu entered a strange state. He did not realize it at all. He was just immersed in this strange state. He practiced his swordsmanship over and over again, as if he did not know fatigue. Every simple movement contained thousands of changes. Because of the mountain quake energy, every stroke was filled with terrifying power. It was as if it could break mountains. As he practiced, the power of the mountain quake energy increased little by little. Its level was constantly increasing. At this moment, outside the sword gauntlet, a silhouette dashed over at lightning speed. It was none other than Jiang Chuan, and his face was filled with anxiety. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidien.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 657. A large number of swordsmen had gathered in a battle arena in the middle of the Sky Edge Sword Palace, forming two distinct camps. On one side were swordsmen from the Archean world, numbering over 10,000. On the other side were swordsmen from the 9 continents. Most of them came from the Archean sword continent, while a small portion came from the other 8 continents. There were only around 1,000 swordsmen in total. The two camps stood opposite each other. Every swordsman gave off a sharp aura that surged and clashed with each other. They glared at each other angrily, showing signs of a major conflict. It could be foreseen that once a major conflict erupted, the swordsmen from the Archean world would crush the swordsmen from the 9 continents with an overwhelming advantage. This was because the two sides had more than 10 times the number of people. Moreover, the swordsmen from the Archean world held the advantage in terms of individual strength. Even though they were at a disadvantage, the swordsmen from the 9 continents were determined not to take even half a step back. This was a conflict between the swordsmen from the 9 continents and the swordsmen from the Archean world. Retreating was equivalent to admitting defeat. Even if they were heavily injured and viciously trampled, they would not back down. A bumpkin will always be a bumpkin. What right do you have to compare yourself to us? A swordsman from the Archean world's camp sneered loudly. That's right. Just like that Chumu. He thinks that he's a little more talented and has a little more outstanding, so he's arrogant and conceited. He doesn't know his place and actually dares to boast about challenging Lord Sikongjian. He's just asking to be humiliated, another swordsman said loudly. His voice was filled with disdain. His words immediately elicited mocking laughter from many other immemorial swordsmen. You're just jealous. Chumu can go from having never touched energy control to reaching the advanced level in just a little more than a month. Can that Sikongjian you speak of do that? A swordsman from the Archean sword continent immediately retorted. That's right. Not only can Chu Mu reach the advanced level in just a little more than a month, his strength has also increased by leaps and bounds in such a short amount of time, passing the 6th stage of the Golem sword array. Can any of you compare to him at such a speed of improvement? Can that Sikong Zhan you speak of do that? Another swordsman from the Archean sword continent roared. Unknowingly, Chu Mu became the idol of the swordsmen of ancient sword continent. This was also because in their original world, they were all at the elite level and were treated like heaven's chosen. But after coming to the supreme ancient immortal realms, they suffered all sorts of disdain and setback. Chu Mu's rise was absolutely domineering, and he became a beacon in their hearts. The recent conflicts were all caused by Chu Mu. I admit that Chu Mu does have some ability, but what right does he have to be compared to Minister of Public Works? As the #1 official disciple, Sikong Zhan still had many admirers. It was unknown how many people wanted to become his followers. Cut the crap. If you have the ability, then call Chu Mu over and let him compete with Minister of Public Works 3rd General. The 3rd General will let you know how weak the Chu Mu you worship is. As soon as these words were spoken, the gazes of many people shifted to the sword battle arena. A man stood there with a tall and mighty figure. He stood ramrod straight, like a huge sword that was stabbed into the ground. He emitted a domineering and fierce aura. He was the 3rd General of Sikong Zhan's 13 generals. Previously, the swordsmen from the Archean sword continent had all been defeated by the 3rd General in one strike. Even Su Haosha, who had obtained the glory of unparalleled combat strength, was not a match for the 3rd General. In just 3 strikes, Su Haosha was defeated. It could be said that no one present was a match for the 3rd General. It was also because of this that Jiang Chuan hurriedly went to find Chu Mu. He felt that this matter had to be handled by Chu Mu. Not long after, Chu Mu and Jiang Chuan walked over with large strides. At the same time, a figure flew over, leaping over the crowd and onto the arena. "I've come to challenge you," the person said coldly, a light flashing in his eyes. "It's him. Fan Bufan. Can Fan Bufan defeat the 3rd General?" Fan Bufan suddenly appeared on the arena, facing the 3rd General from afar. Chu Mu also told Jiang Chuan to keep quiet and approach the crowd. At this moment, everyone's attention was attracted by the 2 people on the arena, so no one noticed Chu Mu's arrival. "You're called Fan Bufan? I heard that you're the only person in the 9 continents to obtain 3 unparalleled honors. That means you're the most powerful person in the 9 continents," the 3rd General said slowly with an indifferent expression. "That's right," Fan Bufan admitted bluntly. "Is that so?" A trace of mockery flashed across the 3rd General's face. "Why do I feel that Chu Mu's reputation is much greater than yours? He is him, and I am me. I will defeat him and let everyone understand that I'm the most powerful person in the 9 continents." Fan Bufan's eyes flashed with a trace of coldness as he took a deep breath and said, "Draw your sword," the 3rd General said with a trace of mockery on his lips. "Otherwise, you won't have the chance to draw your sword." Fan Bufan did not decline modestly. The 3rd General was a powerful opponent that gave him an inexplicable pressure. Sword light flashed as he unsheathed his sword. It was like an aurora streaking across the sky. His body shot out like an arrow leaving the bow, straight and straight, piercing towards the 3rd General at an extremely fast speed. When the sword approached the 3rd General's protective sword aura, sword intent was injected into the sword, instantly piercing through the 3rd General's protective sword aura. It pierced towards the 3rd General at an even faster speed. When the tip of the sword was an inch away from the 3rd General's throat, sword origin and profound meaning were injected into it, instantly erupting. The shocking whistling sound was extremely ear-piercing. Su Haosha and the others were stunned. A trace of astonishment also flashed across the 3rd General's eyes. He did not expect Fan Bufan to have cultivated his power control to such a level. This was a level that many immemorial sword practitioners would need 5 to 6 years of hard work to achieve. No wonder he was the winner of 3 unparalleled honors. He was indeed extraordinary. Fan Buffan's sword intent and profound meaning had already reached perfection. The martial arts he cultivated was a mid-grade heaven-level martial art. His sword origin had been refined time and time again, becoming extremely pure. He had already reached the peak of the complete origin realm. Now that he had cultivated his power control, he could unleash even more power. Every sword strike did not seem as powerful as a sword skill, but its power was not inferior to any of the sword skills he had mastered. All in all, Fan Buffan's strength was even more powerful. This gave him a lot of confidence, and was also the reason why he came here to challenge the third general. He wanted to defeat the third general and let everyone know that he, Fan Buffan, was the real powerful person, and that he was the true genius. The third general's strength was extraordinary. He reacted quickly and quickly retreated, pulling away from Fan Buffan's sword. Under the explosion of power control, Fan Buffan immediately took advantage of the fact that his sword missed. His sword stabbed forward, faster and more accurate. The third general attacked with his sword. In an instant, his sword pierced through the sky like lightning, but the sound was very weak. The third general's sword was even faster than Fan Buffan's sword. With a swing of his sword, he slashed towards Fan Buffan's neck. If Fan Buffan insisted on thrusting his sword out, his neck would be cut by the third general's sword first. Making a prompt decision, Fan Buffan quickly shifted his footstep. He controlled his power and turned into an afterimage. The third general's sword narrowly passed through Fan Buffan's afterimage. Fan Buffan's body turned and flicked like a boneless dragon snake. His sword stabbed out again, increasing its speed as it stabbed towards the third general's heart. This sword was different from the previous one. It was much more tricky. All the swordsman's attention was completely attracted. The third general was slightly surprised as he forcefully twisted his body to avoid the attack. He swept his sword horizontally, wanting to cut Fan Buffan's body in half. Fan Buffan changed his sword moves again. Fan Buffan displayed his talent. His sword was either upright, crafty, soft and powerless, or firm and fierce. In short, in his battle with the third war general, Fan Buffan displayed a variety of different sword styles. Each style was targeted at a specific situation, bringing out the full potential of his sword. As expected of the sky sword continent's heaven's pride. Behind the crowd, Chu Mu nodded inwardly. His sword style is varied and adaptable. His control of the environment and the enemy's reaction are all on point. With such talent, given enough time, he will definitely shine in the Sky Edge Sword Palace. Chu Mu did not dare to talk about the immemorial world because it was simply too big. There were countless geniuses there. Even he did not have the confidence to shine in the immemorial world, let alone Fan Buffan, who was inferior to him. If Fan Buffan knew of Chu Mu's thoughts, he would definitely turn around and fight with Chu Mu. Fan Buffan's fighting style was varied and adaptable, allowing the third general to constantly dodge and counterattack. The third general's fighting style was rather simple, belonging to the steady and steady type. He was most proficient in fighting force with force, using absolute power and tyrannical aura to defeat the enemy. Encountering an opponent like Fan Buffan, he felt somewhat helpless for a moment. However, the third general was not ordinary either. To be able to be taken in as a follower by Sikong Zhan, his talent was much better than ordinary swordsmen. Adding the environment of the immemorial world and Sikong Zhan's guidance, in terms of absolute strength, the third general was only above Fan Buffan. Soon, after dodging a dozen of Fan Buffan's attacks, the third general had adapted to Fan Buffan's fighting style. His body stood on the spot without moving an inch as he waved his sword. It became slow and heavy. Every sword carried a terrifying sword wind and sword pressure, forcing Fan Buffan to dodge again and again. Finding an opportunity, the third general waved his sword. It looked very slow, but in reality, it exploded with speed in an instant. Fan Bufan was startled and could not dodge in time. He hurriedly raised his sword to block. When the third general's sword was about to touch Fan Bufan's sword, he poured in his power and then exploded. With a boom, Fan Bufan's body flew out, spitting out a mouthful of blood as he landed on the stage. He is only one step away from entering the immemorial realm. This third general's strength is definitely within the top 100 official disciples. Chu Mu's pupils shrunk as he thought to himself. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 658. Fan Bufan stood on the arena with a pale face and a trace of blood at the corner of his mouth, which he wiped away with his hand. He never expected that he would be defeated like this. In just a dozen moves, he was defeated by his opponent. Not only did his opponent not suffer any injuries, he did not seem to have consumed much energy either. Fan Bufan, whose pride was deep in his bones, found it hard to accept the reality before his eyes. But the reality was the reality. No matter how unwilling he was, it still happened. You are still weak. The third battle general sheathed his sword and stared at Fan Bufan with a cold smile. A simple sentence, 4 words, made Fan Bufan's pale face turn ashen. He almost spat out another mouthful of blood. Helplessly, the third battle general's foundation was indeed better than Fan Bufan's. His absolute strength was also above Fan Bufan's. Fan Bufan had not cultivated the 9-cycle heart seal because he did not have enough sky edge coins. On the other hand, he did not understand it. Is there no one else among you who can fight me? The third battle general ignored Fan Bufan. He shifted his gaze and swept across the swordsmen from the 9 continents. The arrogance and loftiness in his eyes made people feel extremely uncomfortable. Where is Chu Mu? Could it be that none of you went to call Chu Mu over? Since his name had already been called, Chu Mu naturally wouldn't remain indifferent. With a flash, Chu Mu leaped up and landed on the arena. It's Chu Mu is here. Not only the swordsmen from the ancient sword continent, but even the swordsmen from the immemorial world exclaimed. However, their exclamations were different. The swordsmen from the ancient sword continent were pleasantly surprised, while the swordsmen from the immemorial world were shocked. He's Chu Mu. Fan Bufan's sharp gaze instantly locked onto Chu Mu. Chu Mu's name was something he had heard so many times that calluses were about to grow out of his ears. However, he had never seen Chu Mu before. If they met on the road, Fan Bufan wouldn't even know it was Chu Mu. You are Chu Mu? The third general stared at Chu Mu for a while, then chuckled. You don't look like much. I'm sorry, but I don't have 3 heads and 6 arms, Chu Mu said coolly. His words immediately led to a roar of laughter. Most of the laughter came from the swordsmen of the ancient sword continent. They all supported Chu Mu. The third battle general had good manners and did not become angry because of this. Indeed, you do not have 3 heads and 6 arms. Thus, I will defeat you in front of everyone and let them know that the person they admire is nothing more than this. The third general chuckled and said, You simply do not have the qualifications to challenge Lord Sikongjan. Whether or not I'm qualified is up to me, Chu Mu replied indifferently. In the exchange of words, he did not show any weakness. We will have to verify whether you are qualified or not. The third general roared and pulled out his huge sword. His aura rolled out and the sword pressure exploded. It rolled over and was extremely domineering. Pull out your sword. I will give you the chance to attack first. No need. If I attack, you won't have the chance. Chu Mu did not move at all. His expression did not change and he was calm. It was a stark contrast to his opponent who was ready to attack. As expected, the younger generation is arrogant. The third war general let out a cold laugh. As he waved his enormous sword, He stepped forward and his power control exploded. His entire body transformed into an arrow that left a bow. With a powerful whistling sound, he left behind afterimages as he rapidly approached Chu Mu. The huge sword slashed down with a weak sound. Just as it was about to touch Chu Mu's protective sword aura, sword intent poured in and instantly cut through the protective sword aura. It slashed towards Chu Mu's head at an even faster speed. The power poured in and then exploded. The terrifying sword pressure made Chu Mu feel suffocated. This strike was the third general's true strength. It was domineering and filled with power, causing the swordsmen below the arena who were facing this strike to involuntarily feel as if they were being crushed by the enormous, sharp, and domineering sword pressure. They found it difficult to breathe and could not help but take 2 steps back. Chu Mu's long hair was blown back by the terrifying sword wind. His robe also seemed to be blown back by the wind, making rustling sounds. The huge sword slashed down and Chu Mu was cut in half from his forehead. The third general's expression changed because he did not feel like he had hit anyone. This attack had missed and only hit the afterimage left behind by Chu Mu. His intuition from countless life and death battles allowed him to react quickly. He moved his feet and spun his body. He held his sword with both hands and quickly swept it in a circle before lifting it upwards. Chu Mu's sword tapped on the third general's huge sword. Using the rebound force, he jumped high into the air and twisted in midair before falling down like a falling meteor. The third general raised his head and waved his huge sword with both hands. 2 sword rays broke through the air like crescent moons, shooting straight upwards. The swordsmen of the immemorial world placed great importance on the control of power. This did not mean that they did not know how to use sword rays to attack from a distance. It was just that the difference between the power of sword rays and the control of power was too great, so it was often used as an interference. The third general's goal was to interfere with Chu Mu. Immediately after the 2 sword rays, the third general used his power control and poured it into his legs. With a boom, his entire body shot up. With an earth-shattering boom, he held the giant sword with both hands and stabbed it upwards. His power surged, ready to pour into the sword and explode at any moment. 1 up and 1 down. Chu Mu swung his sword twice and deflected the 2 sword rays. The 8 desolate sky swords slashed down without any sound. They drew an arc of light in the air. Chu Mu's falling figure instantly changed slightly. Like 2 bolts of lightning, they instantly crossed each other in the air. The third general rushed upwards while Chu Mu rushed downwards. With his sword out, the control of power exploded. The sound of wind and thunder surged and roared endlessly. Vaguely, one could even see the air expanding and exploding. The 2 figures crossed each other. Chu Mu landed on the ground. The third general rushed up a few meters before falling down. He faced Chu Mu from a distance of more than 10 meters. "You're too weak." Chu Mu shook off the blood on the tip of his sword and sheathed it. The third general's expression kept changing like a chameleon. There was a long wound on his chest. Blood had already dyed his robe red. The moment the 2 figures passed each other, Chu Mu's sword knocked away the third general's huge sword and left a wound on the third general's chest. If Chu Mu had not shown mercy, this strike would have been enough to seriously injure the third general. The result was very hard for the third general to accept. He had actually lost, and lost very quickly. If his opponent had not shown mercy, he would have been seriously injured, and not just a flesh wound. Defeating me can only mean that your strength is not bad. But compared to Lord Sikongjan, it's like the difference between the sky and the earth. The third general said with a gloomy face. The 13 generals' belief and worship for Sikongjan had almost reached a fanatical level. There's no point in saying more. If I can defeat you, then I can naturally defeat Sikongjan, Chu Mu said indifferently. He did not want to continue arguing as it was meaningless. If you're not convinced, you can call the other generals to fight me. With that, Chu Mu turned around and walked down the arena. Well said. Beat them until they're all convinced. A swordsman from the ancient sword continent roared with an excited tone. The swordsmen from the immemorial world were silent. The third general, who was also very strong in their hearts, had been defeated so easily by Chu Mu. What qualifications did they have to refute, unless there was someone who could defeat Chu Mu? Chu Mu. Staring at Chu Mu's back, Fan Bufan clenched his fists. His expression kept changing. No one knew what he was thinking. Good boy, the immemorial world is the world that truly suits you. Su Haosha walked up and patted Chu Mu's shoulder as he laughed. Even though Chu Mu's strength had surpassed his and he had become a famous figure in the Sky Edge Sword Palace, Su Haosha still did not change his attitude towards Chu Mu. Just like before, he treated him as a friend. This made Chu Mu feel very comfortable. I believe that in the immemorial world, as long as we have enough resources, we can rise up. Chu Mu smiled. Well said. Let's go to your sword tower. Recently, I've made some progress in controlling my strength. However, I still have many questions that I need to ask you. Su Haosha said. The eyes of the swordsman beside him immediately lit up. Brother Chu, why don't we take some of your time and teach us how to better control our strength? A swordsman hesitated for a moment before speaking. His tone carried a hint of pleading. When the other swordsmen heard this, their gazes all gathered on Chu Mu's face. There was hope in their eyes. Okay. Chu Mu thought for a moment before agreeing. The moment Chu Mu agreed, the swordsmen were immediately overjoyed. The swordsmen from the immemorial world were envious. A group of more than 1,000 people all headed towards Chu Mu's sword tower. The first floor of the sword tower was big enough, but it was still very crowded to accommodate more than 1,000 people. However, in order to listen to Chu Mu's explanation of strength control, they didn't care about this little bit of crowding. In terms of strength control, Chu Mu had already cultivated to a deeper level of immemorial realm. Right now, he was moving towards an even deeper level of immemorial realm. He was far ahead of the others. Therefore, it wasn't difficult for him to guide these swordsmen who had yet to reach immemorial realm. After pondering for a moment, Chu Mu began to explain the so-called strength control under everyone's gazes. His explanation was based on his own experience. He integrated various examples, making the explanation more vivid, clearer, and easier to understand. As the swordsmen listened, they all felt as if they were suddenly enlightened. It was as if the clouds parted to reveal the moon. Today's explanation will end here. If there is a chance in the future, I will explain it again. Chu Mu ended the explanation and said in the end, perhaps after listening this time, you all felt that you understood what strength control was and felt that you might be able to cultivate strength control very quickly. However, in reality that was just an illusion. You all still need to work harder and integrate what I said. Only by understanding it thoroughly and practicing hard can you truly achieve strength control or even immemorial realm. Everyone was still unsatisfied. However, since Chu Mu said that the explanation was over, they didn't dare to ask for more. They only hoped that there would be such an opportunity in the future. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 659. The swordsmen all left, leaving only Su Haosha. From his expression, it seemed that he had something to say to Chu Mu. They went to the second floor of the sword tower and sat down in the hall. Jiang Chuan and Ding Xian also sat to the side. Brother Chu, I have an idea. Su Haosha was the first to speak, his eyes shining as he stared at Chu Mu. Speak, Chu Mu said. I'm sure you know the situation here. Take our ancient sword continent as an example. In terms of cultivation environment and resources, the ancient sword continent is far from comparable to the immemorial world. Su Haosha opened his mouth and said, after we came here, we were looked down upon and ridiculed by the swordsmen of the immemorial world. If not for your tyrannical rise, setting a goal for us and suppressing many of the swordsmen of the immemorial world, I'm afraid the consequences would be worrying. Chumu nodded. Although on the ancient sword continent, to be able to cultivate to such a level, one's will was very strong, but in a different environment, it was inevitable that they would not be able to adapt. In addition, in this environment, there were all kinds of contempt, ridicule, and attack. It was very likely that a portion of the swordsmen would sink and end up mediocre. Chu Mu's rise was indeed an inspiration to the swordsmen of the 9 continents, especially the ancient sword continent. It could be said that the current Chu Mu had unknowingly become the leader, the backbone of the swordsmen. We must integrate into the immemorial world, but in the end we came from the ancient sword continent. We cannot forget our roots, Su Haosha said seriously. In addition, although we cannot be considered enemies with the swordsmen of the immemorial world, we can be considered opponents. This can also serve as motivation for us and make us more motivated. So, I have an idea. I want to create an organization that belongs only to us. The purpose of this organization is to unite us, help and support each other, and encourage each other to become a force. Su Haosha said, his tone a little excited. This way, with our unity, even if the swordsmen of the immemorial world look down on us, they won't dare to go too far. And for us, this is a mutually beneficial matter. Su Haosha's words made Jiang Chuan and Ding Xian's eyes light up. Chu Mu began to think. All this time, Chu Mu had never thought about establishing an organization. He pursued personal strength and his own way of the sword. To him, it was better to spend his time on his own cultivation than on establishing and managing an organization. Moreover, Chu Mu was also clear about his own strengths and weaknesses. If he was asked to manage a force, it would be fine if it was just a small team, but if it was to develop a large force, he would not be able to do it. However, what Su Haosha said made sense. He, Chu Mu, came from the ancient sword continent. This was a fact that could not be changed. He was also very clear about how the swordsmen of the 9 continents were treated here. Speaking of which, if it was not for his outstanding ability and miraculous rise, he would probably be like the other swordsmen now, being looked down upon and ridiculed. That was adversity. Adversity could make people improve, but it could also make people sink. I know what you're thinking. Don't worry. Establishing an organization only requires your name. You don't need to personally manage it. Su Haosha looked at Chu Mu's expression and said, what we need is a backbone. You're the most suitable. With you as the center, everyone will be convinced. Then what do you plan to name this organization? Chu Mu immediately smiled and asked. Su Haosha smiled. He knew that Chu Mu had agreed. We come from the ancient sword continent, so this organization will be called the Ancient Sword Alliance. Su Haosha said, I have some experience in management. Indeed, Su Haosha was many times more proficient than Chu Mu when it came to managing an organization. He was also confident in himself. Ancient Sword Alliance. Okay. Chu Mu nodded. After a simple conversation, the Ancient Sword Alliance, which would later be called Zhen Tian's Sword Palace, was established. The current Ancient Sword Alliance was only in its embryonic form. Then it settled. The Ancient Sword Alliance is established. Su Haosha clapped his hands and smiled happily. From now on, Brother Chu, you're the Ancient Sword Alliance's Grand Elder, the only Grand Elder. As for me, I'm the Alliance Master. Brother Chu, Brother Su, the two of us would like to apply to join the alliance, Jiang Chuan hurriedly said, somewhat excited. Okay. Su Haosha immediately agreed. I'll go invite a few people to join the alliance. Also, spread the news of the Ancient Sword Alliance's establishment. Those who want to join the Ancient Sword Alliance can register with you first. After I've arranged everything, we'll choose a day to officially open the alliance and announce the establishment of our Ancient Sword Alliance. No problem. We promise to complete the task. Jiang Chuan and Ding Xian excitedly said at the same time. They immediately got up and left to spread the news of the ancient Sword Alliance's establishment in the 9 continents. Su Haosha also bid farewell to Chu Mu and left the Sword Tower to invite the stronger swordsmen who had a good relationship with him, such as Jiang Li from the Aojian continent and Ji Lingfeng from the Divine Sword continent. Only Chu Mu was left in the Sword Tower. Ancient Sword Alliance. With a faint smile, Chu Mu got up and walked into his bedroom. He closed the door and began to cultivate. He formed a hand seal and circulated the 9-revolution heavenly shocking seal. His mental consciousness wrapped around the ripping profound and tempered the ripping profound with high-frequency vibrations. As for the sword intent, it had already reached the 1st revolution. However, the 2nd hand seal hadn't been improved, so he couldn't temper it to the 2nd revolution. He could only temper it to the 1st revolution first. Soon, 4 hours passed. Chu Mu could feel that the ripping profound had become a little purer. At this rate, it would probably reach the 1st revolution after 2 more rounds of tempering. Once the ripping profound reached the 1st revolution, its purity would definitely double. This would significantly increase Chu Mu's overall strength. After tempering the profound, Chu Mu began to circulate the tempering mind technique to recover his mental consciousness. In the outside world, the 9 continents' Sword Tower regions were bustling with noise and excitement because of this. What was going on? Because the ancient Sword Alliance was about to be established. Why were they so excited about the establishment of the ancient Sword Alliance? Because Chu Mu was the ancient Sword Alliance's Grand Elder, the only Grand Elder. Who was Chu Mu? Were they stupid? They actually dared to ask who Chu Mu was? Who among the official disciples of the Sky Edge Sword Palace didn't know of Chu Mu's name? He was like a lighthouse in the darkness, giving them light and guiding them forward. He dispelled the depression and confusion in their hearts, raised their fighting spirit, and strengthened their willpower. He was like their backbone. Unknowingly, Chu Mu had already become the idol of many swordsmen. It was close to being a religion. He had also become the target of many swordsmen. I want to sign up. I want to sign up too. One by one, Jiang Chuan shouted. Line up according to the line. Come one by one. Don't fight. Ding Xian shouted from the side, maintaining order. There were too many people. There were more than 10,000 swordsmen who passed the test and became official disciples. Among them, there were only 600 to 700 swordsmen from the ancient Sword continent. However, it wasn't only the swordsmen from the ancient Sword continent who worshipped Chu Mu. There were also swordsmen from other continents who worshipped Chu Mu. After Jiang Chuan and Ding Xian spread the news of the establishment of the ancient Sword Alliance, they set up a table in a corner of the Sword Tower district. Instantly, many swordsmen rushed over to register. Because there were too many people, more than 1,000, they decided to use a first-come, first-served method to avoid chaos. Currently, the ancient Sword Alliance was only in its initial stage. It was not officially established yet. After all, it was an organization and could not be careless. Su Haosha already had a plan in mind. He planned to choose a day to gather all the swordsmen who signed up for the ancient Sword Alliance and hold an opening ceremony to announce the official establishment of the ancient Sword Alliance. It would definitely be a grand ceremony. Ancient Sword Alliance. Chu Mu. Fan Bufan, who was cultivating in the Sword Tower, coldly snorted when he heard the news. He was extremely unwilling to lose to the 3rd general. Then, the 3rd general lost to Chu Mu, which made Fan Bufan realize the gap between him and Chu Mu. Fan Bufan continued to train hard. He firmly believed that if he had enough time, he would definitely surpass the 3rd general. He would definitely surpass Chu Mu. It had to be said that Fan Bufan's will was shockingly firm. Facing all kinds of setbacks, he did not retreat and went against the current. Indeed, if such a person was given enough time and opportunity, he could rise up and surpass many people. However, The possibility of him surpassing Chu Mu was not high. While he was improving, Chu Mu was also improving. His improvement speed was only faster than his. Unless he could reach the heavens in one step. Time slowly passed. After a day, more than 1,000 swordsmen signed up for the Ancient Sword Alliance. Among them, more than 60% were swordsmen from the Ancient Sword Continent. They were swordsmen from the Ancient Sword Continent, and the Ancient Sword Alliance was named after the Ancient Sword Continent. The situation was out of Su Haosha's expectations. It was very good. On the second day there were still people signing up. Although it was not as many as the first day, there were still more than 400 swordsmen signing up. On the third day there were even fewer people signing up, only a little more than 100. At this point, there were more than 1,600 swordsmen signing up for the Ancient Sword Alliance. Within the sword gauntlet, Chu Mu was in the midst of tempering the laceration profound meaning. After 4 hours, the tempering ended. Chu Mu felt that his laceration profound meaning had undergone some kind of qualitative change. It had become purer. The laceration profound meaning has also reached the first revolution. Chu Mu felt that the laceration profound meaning's purity had doubled. With the increase in purity, the power of the laceration profound meaning naturally increased as well. Chu Mu's strength had once again increased. Such a speed of improvement was unbelievable. Next, I will continue to study the second-hand seal of the 9 Revolution Heavenly Shocking Seal. I have a premonition that I will definitely succeed today. Tomorrow, I can begin the tempering of the second revolution. Chu Mu said to himself. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 660. I hope you can attend the League opening ceremony in 3 days. Inside the sword tower, Su Haosha said to Chu Mu. I will be there. Chu Mu nodded. As a supreme elder of the Ancient Sword League, it was only right for him to show his face. All right. Su Haosha stood up and left immediately. The Ancient Sword League's league opening ceremony wasn't a child's play. He couldn't be careless. Therefore, he had to make sufficient preparations to deal with all kinds of situations and ensure the smooth completion of the league opening ceremony. After Su Haosha left, Chu Mu pondered for a moment before going downstairs to practice his sword arts. While practicing his sword arts, he also practiced the mountain quaking force and other force exertion technique. After that, he practiced his power control. Power control was the foundation. After that, he would reach the advanced realm. The advanced realm was divided into 3 stages. The first stage was the initial realm. He could only control 1 burst of power and concentrate it on the sword. The second stage was the advanced realm. He could control the burst of power 2 to 3 times in a row and concentrate it on a certain part of the sword, such as the sword edge or the sword tip. This would make the power even more concentrated, and the burst of power would be even more tyrannical. The third stage was the advanced realm. The so-called advanced realm allowed him to concentrate his power on a small point and achieve 7 to 10 bursts in a row. He could also apply the advanced realm to the sword light, allowing the sword light to possess terrifying power. In terms of power control, Chu Mu had already reached the advanced realm. Moreover, it was a profound realm within the advanced realm. Now, he was cultivating towards the advanced realm. However, the advanced realm was much harder than the advanced realm. It was impossible to reach the advanced realm in a short period of time. Other than cultivating his power control, Chu Mu also cultivated his sword arts domain. All of these were power that he had to master. It was his own power. He couldn't slack off. After finishing his cultivation, Chu Mu rested for a moment before returning to his room to refine his sword intent. The 9-cycle Heavenly Heart Shocking Imprints, second imprint, had already been created and reached a perfect state. Chu Mu began the second cycle refinement of his sword intent and profound. Once his sword intent and profundity were refined to the second revolution, his strength would definitely increase significantly. However, after the sword intent and profound had reached the first revolution, it would take more time to refine them. During these 3 days, Chu Mu didn't leave his room. He either went to the first floor to cultivate his sword arts or stayed in his room to refine his sword intent and profound energy. He even took some time to study the third-hand seal of the 9 revolution heavenly shocking seal. As for Jiang Chuan and Ding Xian, they were practically running around outside to prepare for the opening ceremony. In the blink of an eye, 3 days had passed. Chu Mu was still in the midst of cultivation, seemingly forgetting the time. In an empty space within the Sword Tower area of the 9 continents, the various platforms needed for the opening ceremony had already been set up. The place had also been cleaned and arranged. It was very clean and looked very different from the other places. The golden-red cloth fluttered in the wind, adding to the solemnity of the Alliance opening ceremony that had yet to begin. There were around 2,000 people gathered here from afar. They were the people who had signed up to join the Ancient Sword Alliance. Su Haosha used his movement technique and flew over like a great rock. He landed on the main platform and raised his hand. The various discussions immediately quieted down. Aside from the members of the Ancient Sword Alliance, there were also many swordsmen gathered around. There were several thousand of them, and they were all spectators. They were hesitating in their hearts. They didn't know if they should join the Ancient Sword Alliance, so they specially came to see the situation before making a decision. Vaguely, they had a strange feeling that the Ancient Sword Alliance's opening ceremony wouldn't go so smoothly. Perhaps there would be some unforeseen event. Everyone, today is the opening ceremony of the Ancient Sword Alliance. We welcome everyone to participate. On the main platform, Su Haosha spoke in a clear voice. He handled this kind of situation with great ease. We aren't people from the archaic world. We come from other continents. Compared to the archaic world, whether it's the cultivation environment or resources, it's like the difference between heaven and earth. Compared to the swordsmen of the archaic world, we're very weak. No one refuted Su Haosha's words because what he said was the truth. However, many swordsmen were filled with unwillingness in their hearts. But so what? In terms of talent, we won't lose to the swordsmen of the immemorial world. The only difference between us is the difference in cultivation environment and cultivation resources. As long as we have enough time, we can also become strong and not be inferior to the swordsmen of the immemorial world. Su Haosha's tone changed and became passionate. I only have one goal in creating the Ancient Sword Alliance, and that's to unite us. Yes, we're indeed not strong enough right now. In fact, we might even be weak. However, I believe that if we unite, cooperate, help, and support each other, Su Haosha's passionate mood immediately affected everyone. Their hearts were burning with passion, and their blood was practically boiling. As long as we unite and form a force, who would dare to look down on us? Su Haosha said. You're saying it better than singing it. I dare to look down on you. What can you do? Suddenly, a voice pierced through the air like an arrow, causing everyone's expression to change. They all turned their heads to look at the source of the voice. They saw several figures quickly walking over. The one who spoke was the leader. His long hair was tied behind his head, and his long and narrow eyes were incomparably sharp. There was a trace of contempt in his eyes, and a cold smile hung on the corner of his mouth. Who are you? As the leader of the Ancient Sword Alliance, Su Haosha had the obligation to stand out. My lord is Niangjie, ranked 5th among the top 100 disciples. Among the several figures, one of them spoke. His tone was filled with arrogance. Among the official disciples of the Sky Edge Sword Palace, the top 10 disciples more or less had followers. Niangjie ranked 5th among the official disciples. Everyone's heart trembled, and their expressions changed. Su Haosha's face was solemn, and his eyes were grave. The other party's tone indicated that they didn't come with good intentions. Furthermore, he was ranked 5th among the official disciples. His strength was tyrannical, and Su Haosha had to treat him seriously. Why isn't Chu Mu here yet? Su Haosha was secretly anxious. There was nothing he could do about it. The ancient sword alliance could be said to be established using Chu Mu's name. If it was Su Haosha's name, he could indeed establish the ancient sword alliance, but the number of members would definitely be few. It would be good if there were a few dozen members. This time, Su Haosha also expected that the ancient sword alliance's opening ceremony wouldn't be so smooth. He guessed that there would be some changes during the ceremony, so he made a lot of preparations. However, he didn't expect that the trouble would come from Niangjie, ranked 5th among the official disciples. Although his strength was several times stronger than when he was in the ancient sword continent, Su Haosha was very clear that his current strength couldn't be compared with the top 100 official disciples, let alone Niangjie, who was ranked 5th. Therefore, Su Haosha could only place his hopes on Chu Mu. He didn't know what level Chu Mu's strength had reached, but Chu Mu was the only one who had a chance to fight against Niangjie. However, Chu Mu still hadn't appeared. Su Haosha knew that Chu Mu wasn't someone who would break his promise. It must be because he was immersed in cultivation and forgot about the time. This was very normal. Today is the opening ceremony of my ancient sword alliance. Brother Nie's presence has added luster to our ancient sword alliance. Su Haosha's mind quickly turned, and he immediately came up with a countermeasure. His face revealed a smile as he cupped his hands towards Niangjie. The other swordsmen clenched their fists and looked at Niangjie's group with an unfriendly expression. However, no one said anything because they knew that Su Haosha was the alliance master. My arrival has indeed added luster to your ancient sword alliance. Niangjie sneered. In order to celebrate the establishment of the ancient sword alliance, I've specially prepared a big gift. I'm here to accept any challenge from your ancient sword alliance. If you can defeat me, I'll give you 3,000 Sky Edge coins. If you can't defeat me, it can only mean that your ancient sword alliance is a motley crew, a collection of trash. Niangjie didn't show any mercy, which made Su Haosha's face sink. Jiang Li and Ji Lingfeng took a step forward. Their auras were incomparably sharp, and they glared at Niangjie. However, they were stopped by Su Haosha. Jiang Li and Ji Lingfeng were the two vice leaders of the ancient sword alliance. Niangjie's ruthless provocation had already infuriated them. Even if they weren't Niangjie's match, they weren't willing to let him humiliate them. However, Su Haosha knew that even if Jiang Li and Ji Lingfeng joined hands, they still wouldn't be Niangjie's match. The slightest gap between experts would be stretched to the maximum. Right now, they didn't have the qualifications to challenge Niangjie. Therefore, they could only stall for time and hope that Chu Mu would arrive as soon as possible. At this time, the clever Jiang Chuan had already left and returned to the sword tower to look for Chu Mu. What? Is there no one in the ancient sword alliance who dares to fight my lord? One of Niangjie's followers sneered. I know. You must think that my lord is too strong and you're not his match. Even if you fight, you'll only be humiliating yourselves. Since that's the case, I'll plead with my lord on your behalf. My lord, they're too weak. They don't have the qualifications to be my lord's opponent. This subordinate suggests that I play with them and let them understand that the so-called ancient sword alliance is nothing more than a motley crew. The swordsman immediately turned to Niangjie and said. His words weren't concealed at all. Even Su Haosha, who had a calm temperament, was on the verge of exploding. If it wasn't for the overall situation, he would have already drawn his sword in anger. I'd like to see what kind of ability you have to speak such arrogant words. Ancient sword alliances, Lai Shanhu couldn't help but roar. He raised his sword and strode forward. His aura was fierce and violent, more powerful than before. To be continued. If you like this work, you're welcome to come to Qidian. Come to vote. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 661. Is that all of you? You're just a mob. On the stage, one of Niangjie's followers sneered. Lai Shanhu was defeated, and so was Ji Qingyu. A total of more than a dozen swordsmen went up the stage, but they were all easily defeated by Niangjie's followers. Each of Niangjie's followers was very strong, and they could be ranked among the top 10,000 official disciples. Lai Shanhu and the others couldn't compare to them. In the end, Ji Lingfeng also went up the stage, but he was still defeated. Su Haosha didn't go up. He was the leader. Although everyone knew that Su Haosha would lose if he went up, not being defeated was a different feeling. If Su Haosha went up and was defeated, it would be a huge blow to the Ancient Sword Union. It was very likely that today's Ancient Sword Union opening ceremony would become a joke. The members of the Ancient Sword Union had ashen faces. As for the surrounding swordsmen, some of them had a common enemy, and some of them were gloating from time to time. Maybe the Ancient Sword Union opening ceremony would be a joke. Who else wants to fight with me? One of Niangjie's followers' eyes emitted a cold light as he swept his gaze across the crowd. His lips curled into a mocking smile, and all kinds of contempt and disdain were very obvious. Sorry, I was cultivating too much and forgot the time. A calm and gentle voice sounded, and Su Haosha immediately revealed an expression of ecstasy. Everyone quickly turned around and saw a figure slowly walking over. It seemed very slow, but in fact it was very fast. In the blink of an eye, it was already in front of them. Grand Elder, you're finally here. Su Haosha smiled. It's Chu Mu. Chu Mu is the Ancient Sword Union's Grand Elder. Chu Mu is here, there's a good show to watch. All kinds of discussions sounded out. Niangjie and the others naturally heard the discussions, and their gazes were all focused on Chu Mu. Chu Mu's name was like thunder to everyone's ears. Finally, someone with some weight has come. One of Niangjie's followers laughed and said, Come, Ancient Sword Alliance's Supreme Elder Chu Mu, let me see your strength. You're not qualified. Chu Mu glanced at him and said indifferently. The swordsmen of the Ancient Sword Alliance all felt a little better, while the other party's expression turned gloomy. You don't dare to. The voice became strange. I've already said that you're not qualified to fight me. Chu Mu said indifferently. His gaze shifted to Niangjie's face. Niangjie, ranked 5th among the official disciples. Ancient Sword Alliance has just been established. Thank you for your gift. I've already prepared the gift. Let's see if you have the ability to accept it. Niangjie sneered. Whether or not I have the strength, you will know very soon, Chu Mu said indifferently. He even dared to challenge the first-ranked Sikongzhan, let alone the 5th-ranked Niangjie. Moreover, his sword intent and tearing profound had been refined to the first revolution, and his sword art domain had also broken through to the 4th layer. His mountain-shaking energy's power had also increased. Chu Mu's overall strength had improved significantly. Very good, I'll wait for you. Niangjie sneered. Chu Mu's recent fame was very loud, but Niangjie didn't put him in his eyes. After all, he was ranked 5th among the 2 million official disciples. Sir, there's no need for you to do it yourself. We can do it for you, one of Niangjie's followers said. Chu Mu, I'll give you a chance. If you want to fight me, you have to defeat my followers first, Niangjie said with his hands behind his back. Chu Mu didn't say anything. He walked towards Niangjie's followers step by step. Come, let me see what kind of strength the recently famous person has. One of Niangjie's followers jumped out and unsheathed his sword, thrusting it towards Chu Mu. His vision blurred, and then a pain came from his abdomen. His whole body trembled, and he bent down like a prawn, kneeling on the ground. His sword fell from his hand, and his hands pressed on his abdomen. His face was pale, and sweat kept pouring out. In that instant, many swordsmen didn't have time to react. Niangjie's follower had already knelt on the ground. Niangjie's pupils shrank. In that instant, he saw Chu Mu and his follower pass each other. His follower's sword was dodged by Chu Mu, and Chu Mu's sword was still sheathed. He only used the tip of his sword to point at his follower's abdomen. The three followers behind Niangjie also moved. They unsheathed their swords and formed a line to attack Chu Mu. From their actions, one could see that they often cooperated with each other, and there was almost no blind spot. However, when Chu Mu passed by them, their swords fell from their hands. Their hands pressed on their abdomen as they knelt on the ground, their faces pale and their bodies trembling. Can't take a single blow. Standing in front of Niangjie, Chu Mu indifferently said. Niangjie's face was extremely ugly. As the saying went, before beating a dog, one had to look at its master. Chu Mu had easily defeated his 4 followers in front of him, and he hadn't even unsheathed his sword. This made Niangjie feel like he had lost face. Looking around, he saw all kinds of proud and gloating eyes. Niangjie felt a ball of anger burning in his chest. Although angry, Niangjie didn't lose his mind. He raised his guard against Chu Mu. Without unsheathing his sword, just the tip of the sword was enough to defeat his 4 followers. This kind of method was very shocking. Niangjie, do you plan to give the congratulatory gift now, or do you plan to give it after you're defeated by my sword? Facing Niangjie, Chu Mu spoke without mercy. Arrogant, take my sword. Niangjie angrily said. His right hand touched his waist. In an instant, a dazzling sword light swept out in an arc. The sword Niangjie used was a flexible sword that was usually kept in his belt. This sword was very sudden. Because Niangjie's flexible sword was not unsheathed, it was always in his belt. People who didn't understand the situation would be caught off guard by his sudden sword. Chu Mu's sword was also unsheathed. Niangjie's wrist turned. The flexible sword was like a spirit snake, but also like seaweed in the water. A dazzling sword light interfered with people's vision. The sword light was very flexible, densely packed, forming arcs that attacked Chu Mu from all angles. Chu Mu seemed to be surrounded by countless arcs of sword light. In an instant, Niangjie's eyes shone with a sharp light. He exerted his control over his strength, pouring it in and erupting it. The speed of one of the arcs of light increased dramatically as its strength increased explosively. It shuttled through the countless arcs of light, slashing out at an inconceivable angle. Just from this sword, it could be seen that Niangjie's strength was extraordinary. Chu Mu's sword was unsheathed. The sword light disappeared, as if it had disappeared into the air. Sword essence and sword intent were all poured in and exploded. Under the sword, all the arcs of light were shattered. Niangjie's expression changed. He hurriedly retreated, but he was still a step too late. Chu Mu's sword slashed across his chest. The protective sword aura was like an illusion. Under the sword, a wound appeared on his chest. Blood spurted out. When powerful swordsmen fought, the duration would not be too long. Swordsmen were synonymous with attack. They were powerful and sharp. Especially when there was a difference in strength, victory and defeat would usually be decided within a few swords. Niangjie's strength was very strong. Just by looking at his sword, one could tell. However, Chu Mu was even stronger. He saw through Niangjie's sword attack and used an even more tyrannical strength to defeat Niangjie's attack and counterattack. In terms of sword intent and profound, Chu Mu was the same as Niangjie, both at the first rank. Perhaps Niangjie's was a bit more profound, but as long as he didn't reach the second rank, his strength would be limited compared to Chu Mu. In terms of power control, Niangjie was only close to the advanced realm, but had not reached the advanced realm. On the other hand, although Chu Mu was only at the initial advanced realm, the power he erupted with was above Niangjie. In addition to the various factors such as eyesight and reaction, it was natural for Niangjie to be defeated by Chu Mu. Chu Mu had been merciful in this sword attack. Otherwise, the injury on Niangjie's chest would have been several times worse. Leave your congratulatory gift and you can leave, Chu Mu said. Niangjie's face was pale and gloomy as he stared at Chu Mu. Then, with a wave of his hand, sky edge coins flew out from his interspatial ring and pounced on Chu Mu like a swarm of locusts. Chu Mu waved his hand and the 3,000 sky edge coins were all stored in his interspatial ring. "Thank you for your gift. I won't send you off," Chu Mu said. "Let's go." Niangjie gave Chu Mu a deep look and roared. He turned and strode away. His 4 followers also got up and left with Niangjie. "Grand Elder, you've become even stronger," Su Haosha said. Although he didn't know what level Chu Mu's strength had reached, Su Haosha felt that Chu Mu's strength had increased again after defeating Niangjie in one sword attack. Niangjie's arrival and departure formed a sharp contrast. The Ancient Sword Alliance's swordsmen only felt elated and happy. They looked at Chu Mu with eyes full of worship and respect. After this matter, Chu Mu's strength was deeply ingrained in their hearts. Many of the spectating swordsmen were tempted and secretly decided to join the Ancient Sword Alliance and become one of its members. Chu Mu had defeated the 5th-ranked official disciple, Niangjie, in one sword attack. This meant that Chu Mu's strength was at least in the top 3. For them, this was a great motivation. They believed that with such a powerful swordsman, the Ancient Sword Alliance would definitely develop. With Chu Mu's timely appearance and defeat Niangjie, the alliance opening ceremony continued. The atmosphere became even more lively because of what had just happened. The host of the alliance opening ceremony was still Su Haosha. Chu Mu wasn't good at it. He only needed to sit in the Grand Elder's seat. Su Haosha's tone was filled with motivation, causing the blood of the Ancient Sword Alliance's sword practitioners to boil. Their fighting spirit soared, and a powerful aura spread out from their bodies. It soared into the sky, wanting to break through the clouds. When the alliance opening ceremony was coming to an end, several figures came from afar. Each of them emitted a shocking aura. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Qidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 662. 3 Silhouettes, 3 People. The powerful aura was extremely sharp and overbearing. It was like an invisible water that rolled over. Su Haosha stopped his speech on the main stage, and everyone's attention was attracted to the 3 silhouette. The 3rd general, immediately, many people recognized the identity of one of the 3 silhouettes. As for the other 2, they did not recognize them. However, when they walked over with the 3rd general and looked at the 3rd general's expression and posture, they immediately guessed. Could it be the 2nd general and 1st general? The world of swordsmen was orderly. When the 3 arrived, they wantonly exuded a sharp and overbearing aura. With one look, one could tell that they were like Niangjie and did not come with good intentions. However, now that Grand Elder Chu Mu was present, the swordsmen seemed to have taken a calming pill and were not nervous at all. It was completely different from when they faced Niangjie. The 3rd battle general seemed to have said something, and the other 2 people's gazes passed through many people and fell on Chu Mu. Their gazes were sharp and threatening. Could it be that you are also here to send congratulatory gifts? Since the other party's target was him, Chu Mu had no reason to avoid it. He stood up with a smile on his face and spoke unhurriedly. I have a gift, but it depends on whether you dare to accept it or not. The 1st general, Fei Kong, laughed. Since it is a congratulatory gift, why would I not dare to accept it? Chu Mu's expression was calm. Just now, Niangjie sent 3,000 sky edge coins as a congratulatory gift. As Sikong Zhan's generals, I wonder what kind of congratulatory gift you have prepared? Chu Mu's words instantly caused the 3 great battle generals to be secretly shocked. It turned out that Niangjie had already come before them. They had some understanding of Niangjie. He had a rather eccentric personality and was not someone easy to get along with. Why would he come to send a congratulatory gift? For a moment, the 3 generals looked at each other and guessed that Niangjie might have come to cause trouble and realized that he could not do anything to Chu Mu. Due to the problem of face, He put down the 3,000 sky edge coins and left angrily. Their guesses were very close to the truth. However, it was not that Niangjie could not do anything to Chu Mu, but that he was defeated by Chu Mu. 5,000 sky edge coins, Fei Kong said. Chu Mu's words had placed them in a very high position. It was as if they had come to represent Xikongzhan, and Xikongzhan was much stronger than Niangjie. Since Niangjie had taken out 3,000 sky edge coins as a congratulatory gift, then they couldn't take out any less than Niangjie. The moment Fei Kong spoke, many swordsmen's expressions changed. They already knew the value of sky edge coins, and how difficult it was to obtain them. Niangjie's offer of 3,000 sky edge coins had already shocked them, and Fei Kang's offer of 5,000 sky edge coins was even more shocking. It was just that, talking was talking. Fei Kong did not think that he really needed to take out 5,000 sky edge coins. However, if you want to accept this gift, we'll have to see if you're qualified enough, Fei Kong continued. Draw a line, Chu Mu said. Today, he had appeared as the Ancient Sword Alliance's Supreme Elder. Everything he did was to boost the Ancient Sword Alliance's prestige. His every action was to boost the Ancient Sword Alliance's prestige. As such, he had completely changed from his usual low profile to revealing his sharpness. Several days ago, you defeated the third general, which is enough to prove your strength is extraordinary. Fei Kang's eyes shone with a sharp light as he said directly, If you can defeat me, I'll give you 5,000 sky edge coins. Then prepare 5,000 sky edge coins. Although Chu Mu's tone was calm, there was an extreme sharpness hidden within, shocking everyone. The moment the surrounding people heard this, they knew that the Ancient Sword Alliance's Grand Elder Chu Mu was going to fight with the number 1 general under Xikongzhan's 13 subordinates. As the number 1 general under Xikongzhan's 13 subordinates, Fei Kang's strength was very, very strong. Thus, they didn't know if Chu Mu could defeat him. Fei Kong leaped into the air, landing on one of the battle stages. Chu Mu's sleeves fluttered lightly as he soared into the air like an eagle. He flew past the crowd and landed on the battle stage, facing Fei Kong from afar. Let me remind you, my strength is not something the likes of Niangjie can compare to, Fei Kong said as he unsheathed his sword. 3 sword rays pierced through the air and slashed towards Chu Mu. At the same time, Fei Kang's feet stomped on the ground as his speed exploded, leaving behind a series of indistinguishable afterimages. Like a storm, he rushed towards Chu Mu right after the 3 sword rays. His sword seemed to have disappeared. The second and third generals stared at Chu Mu. They wanted to see how Chu Mu would deal with Fei Kang's attack. As the leader of the 13 generals, the number 1 general, Fei Kong was much stronger than the other generals. His sword intent and profundity had both reached the second transition. Even the second and third generals knew that the number 1 general, Fei Kong, had already reached the advanced stage in terms of control over his strength. However, as Xikongzhan's followers, they wouldn't enter the top 100. As soon as Fei Kong attacked, Chu Mu felt a great pressure. The 3 sword rays shattered under Chu Mu's sword. Fei Kang's sword silently stabbed towards Chu Mu, tearing apart Chu Mu's protective sword aura. The sharp sword was like a meteor descending from outer space. As it approached Chu Mu, it poured its power and instantly exploded. Chu Mu's hair stood on end as a chill ran down his spine. He instinctively retreated and used the advanced stage. A shocking whistling sound tore through the air like the roar of a storm. Fei Kang's sword missed, and the afterimage left behind by Chu Mu was instantly torn apart. Advanced stage sword. Chu Mu was a little surprised as he stared at Fei Kong with a serious gaze. He had fought with the third general before. The third general's control over his strength was very close to the advanced stage, but had not reached the advanced stage. As for the number 1 general's sword, Chu Mu was 100% sure that it had already reached the advanced stage. In addition, Chu Mu also felt that the other party's sword intent and profound was very pure, much better than his own. Advanced stage, second revolution sword intent profound. Chu Mu's first rank profound was ripping profound. Previously, ripping profound was much stronger than normal profound. However, after reaching full mastery and going through refinement, ripping profound's advantage was no longer as obvious. Fei Kong took the initiative and stepped forward, quickly gliding over and stabbing towards Chu Mu again. This time it was even more strange. Chu Mu did not retreat and instead charged towards Fei Kang's sword. He slashed out with the desolate sky sword from 8 directions, and the power of the sword domain spread out. Fei Kong immediately felt that his sword was being pulled by a force and started to deviate. His expression slightly changed as he poured his power and instantly broke through the power of the sword domain. He corrected his trajectory and stabbed towards Chu Mu's throat. Fei Kang's control over his strength had only reached the advanced stage, and he was unable to continuously explode. The power of this sword was not strong enough. Chu Mu's sword stabbed forward towards Fei Kang. The 8 desolate sky sword and Fei Kang's sword were almost side by side. Chu Mu's wrist shook, and the 8 desolate sky sword vibrated at high speed, immediately pushing Fei Kang's sword away. The sword then stabbed out even faster, like a flash of light. Fei Kang, who had been through hundreds of battles, suddenly stopped. He lowered his body and lowered his center of gravity. Then, he suddenly burst out, causing Chu Mu's sword to almost brush past his hair. The long sword slashed out, as if it wanted to cut Chu Mu in half. The sword light broke through the air and shattered the afterimage. Chu Mu strangely appeared behind Fei Kang and slashed down with his sword. The arc was small, but the power was incomparably strong. The sword slashed down, but it was only an afterimage. Fei Kang's figure appeared at the side, and he turned around and slashed out, as if cutting through the void. Counterattack, mountain quaking energy, vibration sword, immediately pushed Fei Kang's sword away. Taking advantage of the momentum, Fei Kang's sword was infused with power and exploded. This sword was too fast. Before Fei Kang could feel his hand go numb, Chu Mu's sword had already landed on his chest. The inner armor was immediately cut open by Chu Mu's sword, and a terrifying power invaded. Fei Kang hurriedly mobilized his sword energy and sword intent to block it. His whole body also borrowed the power of this sword to fly back, pulling away from Chu Mu. The clothes on his chest were torn, and a crack appeared on the inner armor. Traces of blood seeped out. The injury was not serious, and would not affect the following battle. Fei Kang stared at Chu Mu for a while, then put his sword back into the scabbard. With a wave of his left hand, sky edge coins flew out from the interspatial ring, and swarmed towards Chu Mu like a swarm of locusts. Chu Mu took them all. 5,000 sky edge coins were all stored in the interspatial ring. Without saying anything, Fei Kang turned around and jumped off the sword fighting stage in large strides. The second and third generals glanced at Chu Mu before leaving as well. It seemed that they were here to deliver sky edge coins. Chu Mu stood on the arena, and everyone's attention was on him. He stared at Fei Kang's back, and his pupils constricted as he pondered. Fei Kang's strength surprised Chu Mu. If it wasn't for the 4th level of the sword art domain, this battle would have been very difficult to win. The entire battle took only about 10 breaths, but the two sides changed many times. Each time they exchanged blows, it was extremely dangerous, and one could lose if they were not careful. During the entire battle, Chu Mu was 100% vigilant, and did not dare to relax at all. Otherwise, he might be the one to lose. The first general's strength was much stronger than the third general's. With such strength, he's still not Sikongjian's match. How strong is Sikongjian? Chu Mu said to himself. In the fight against the number 1 warrior general, it seemed that he had won by a bit. However, Chu Mu knew very clearly that he had already brought out his true strength. If they continued to fight, he firmly believed that he would still win. However, it definitely wouldn't be easy and he could even be injured. I must continue to improve as soon as possible. Only then will I be able to fight with Sikongjan, and even defeat him. Chu thought to himself. He felt a great pressure in his heart. This pressure made it difficult for him to breathe, but it also made him excited. The others didn't know what Chu was thinking in his heart. From their point of view, Chu defeating Sikongjan's #1 warrior within a few strikes was a great honor to them. After the first general, there were no more troublemakers, and no one sent congratulatory gift. The Ancient Sword Alliance's opening ceremony was successfully completed. 8,000 Sky Edge coins. Chu gave all of them to Su Haosha. Although it was Chu who obtained them, it was considered a congratulatory gift for the Ancient Sword Alliance. It was arranged by Su Haosha, and it would be used as a reward for the swordsmen who contributed to the Ancient Sword Alliance. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 663. The Ancient Sword Alliance's alliance opening ceremony ended smoothly and the number of members increased to 3,000. Su Haosha also announced the simple rules of the alliance. As for the detailed rules, they would be announced one after another. Nothing could be accomplished without rules. Basically, Chu had nothing to do with it. He returned to the Sword Tower and continued to cultivate. The news of Niangjie and Sikongjan's #1 general being defeated by Chu spread out and caused another sensation. Niangjie is ranked 5th, but he was defeated by Chu. What's so strange about that? Sikongjan's #1 general, Fei Kong, is definitely stronger than Niangjie. Even he was defeated by Chu, let alone Niangjie. Big brother, with your strength, you shouldn't be defeated by Chu, right? The #2 general said to Fei Kong. The discussions outside made the 13 generals very angry. My sword intent has reached the second transition, my profound has also reached the second transition, and my control of power has also reached the first transition. Fei Kong said slowly. His sword intent and profound are both at the first transition, not as good as mine. However, his application of the first transition is above mine, and his attainments in sword arts are also above mine. If I go all out, I have a 70% chance of defeating him. Moreover, my goal is only to test his methods. Winning or losing doesn't matter. That's right, but big brother, the rumors outside are saying that you are not as good as Chu. I am very unhappy that Chu is in the limelight, the #2 general said angrily. Don't worry, the higher you are, the worse you will fall in the end. Fei Kong smiled coldly and said, at that time, if he really dares to challenge Lord Sikongjan, he'll have to go through us. At that time, I'll reveal my true strength and defeat him in front of countless people. I'll let him know the difference between us. He's not qualified to challenge Lord Sikongjan at all. That's right, let him be in the limelight for a while. At that time, his reputation will become a stepping stone for Lord Sikongjan, the #5 general said. Day after day passed. Chu was still cultivating while Su Haosha, Jiangli, Jilingfeng, and the upper echelons of Ancient Sword Alliance discussed for several days. In the end, they came up with a relatively complete set of rules and officially announced them. Every member of the Ancient Sword Alliance was given a book that recorded the rules of the Ancient Sword Alliance. They had to familiarize themselves with the book and memorize the rules. If they violated the rules, they would be expelled from the Ancient Sword Alliance. As a Grand Elder of the Ancient Sword Alliance, Chu naturally received a copy of the Alliance's rules. He only needed to read it once before memorizing it. In the blink of an eye, 20 days had passed. The research on the third-hand seal of the 9 Revolution Heavenquake seal was nearing completion. The embryonic form of the sword soul in his spiritual world shook and became more solid. Chu could feel that the purity of his sword intent had doubled again. Second Revolution of Sword Intent. First Revolution of Sword Intent was twice as pure as Perfect Revolution of Sword Intent. Second revolution of sword intent was twice as pure as perfect revolution of sword intent. This caused Chu Mu's strength to increase by another step. As for lacerating profound, it had already reached the peak of the first revolution. However, Chu Mu felt that it would take at least 10 more days to refine it to the second revolution. At that time, his strength would increase by leaps and bounds once again. As time passed, everything was peaceful. Chu Mu was cultivating every day. Finally, lacerating profound had successfully reached the second revolution. The third hand seal of the 9 revolution Heavenquake seal was initially completed. After spending some more time perfecting it, he would be able to start refining the third revolution of sword intent and profound. Second revolution of sword intent and lacerating profound has also reached the second revolution. My strength has increased by a lot. It's time to challenge the puppet sword formation. Chu Mu stood up and said inwardly. He immediately left the sword tower and headed towards the puppet sword formation area. Now that Chu Mu's reputation had skyrocketed, no one could compare with him. Therefore, his every move was closely watched. As soon as Chu Mu walked towards the puppet sword formation area, he immediately attracted the attention of many swordsmen. The news quickly spread. Instantly, many swordsmen rushed over and rushed into the puppet sword formation area, causing the puppet sword formation area to be unprecedentedly lively. Sikong Zhan and several of the 13 warlords also came to the puppet sword formation area. They wanted to see if Chu Mu's strength had increased significantly after more than a month. As soon as Chu Mu entered the puppet sword formation area, he was shocked by the crowd. Especially when he appeared, almost all the swordsmen's eyes were focused on him. At least 300,000 to 400,000. Chu Mu sighed inwardly. He vaguely knew that these swordsmen were probably here for him. Since he was here, Chu Mu did not plan to leave. Fortunately, when the swordsmen saw Chu Mu coming, they consciously made way for him. There was even a swordsman who directly handed a number plate to Chu Mu so that Chu Mu could challenge the puppet sword formation directly. Chu Mu smiled helplessly and expressed his gratitude to the swordsman. He then took the number plate and walked towards the nearest puppet sword formation. There was no one in the puppet sword formation. Chu Mu directly walked into the puppet sword formation and began to challenge it. The first stage of the puppet sword formation, Yin and Yang sword formation. In just a breath's time, Chu Mu passed through the Yin and Yang sword formation. His sword is faster. It's only been slightly more than a month and his improvement is so obvious. I believe that there's nothing that Chu Mu can't do. Soon, Chu Mu passed through the second stage of the puppet sword formation, 3 talents sword formation. The third stage of the puppet sword formation, 4 symbols sword formation. The fourth stage of the puppet sword formation, 5 elements sword formation. The fifth stage of the puppet sword formation, hexagonal sword formation. Chu Mu's speed in challenging the puppet sword formation was shocking. In just a few breaths' time, he consecutively broke through the 5th stage of the hexagonal sword formation and entered the 6th stage of the 7 stars sword formation. Previously, Chu Mu had challenged the 7 stars sword formation and finally passed it. However, it was somewhat difficult. The pressure of the 7 stars sword formation was very great, and part of it was aimed at the spiritual level. At that time, Chu Mu had to resist it with all his strength. Now, Chu Mu's sword intent and laceration profound had both broken through from perfection to the second transition. His strength had increased by several times, and his spiritual world had also become more solid. The pressure of the 7 stars sword formation could no longer affect Chu Mu's movements. Chu Mu easily resisted the pressure of the 7 stars sword formation. However, Chu Mu was not in a hurry to break the 7 stars sword formation. Instead, he slowly comprehended the mysteries of the 7 stars sword formation as he dodged. Around the puppet sword formation, hundreds of thousands of swordsmen were densely packed. There were 3 inner and 3 outer circles, and it was almost airtight. Every swordsman had their eyes wide open as they stared at Chu Mu, who was inside the puppet sword formation. They did not miss any of his movements. It can be seen that Chu Mu's strength has increased by a lot compared to a month ago. Yes, I also saw him challenge the 7 stars sword formation. It was very difficult, but now, he is handling it with ease. The increase in strength is very obvious. Xikongzhan and a few of the 13 generals were shocked. They looked at each other and saw the grave expression in each other's eyes. They all knew that Chu Mu was not as strong as he was now. In other words, in just a month's time, Chu Mu's strength had increased by a lot. This was simply impossible. But the truth was right in front of their eyes. The several generals trembled as a chill came from the depths of their spine and instantly spread throughout their body. It made their hairs stand on end and they felt fear. Perhaps, Chu Mu really has the qualifications to challenge Lord Xikongzhan. One of the generals said in a low voice with a trembling voice. In their hearts, Xikongzhan was a godlike existence. They believed that within the Sky-Edge Sword Palace, even the elite disciples could not compare to Xikongzhan. Even among the elite disciples, there were still many people whose strength was above Xikongzhan. But the 13 generals firmly believed that as long as Xikongzhan was given enough time, he would definitely become the #1 elite disciple. He would dominate the elite disciples and be at the top, just like an official disciple. Ever since Chu Mu announced that he would challenge Xikongzhan, they began to pay attention to Chu Mu. At the beginning, they were disdainful and looked down on him. Until they were defeated by Chu Mu's sword one by one, they began to feel fear when they saw Chu Mu's improvement. No, how can Chu Mu compare to Lord Xikongzhan? He is improving, but Lord Xikongzhan is also improving. Once he dares to challenge Lord Xikongzhan won't even need to make a move. We will make him taste the bitter taste of defeat. Just as the generals were communicating, Chu Mu attacked. A sword light seemed to come from the heavens and instantly caused the 7-star sword formation to stagnate. With a few more strikes, the 7-star sword puppets were defeated one by one. The 6th stage of the puppet sword formation, 7-star sword formation, break. In an instant, Chu Mu entered the 7th stage of the puppet sword formation, 8-fold sword formation. 8-fold sword formation, metal, wood, water, fire, earth, wind, ice, thunder. The 8-fold sword puppets also had different attribute. They grasped different attributes of sword energy and profound power of different attribute. Chu Mu appeared in the center of the 8-fold sword formation. The 8-fold sword formation was immediately activated. A terrifying aura spread out and a terrifying pressure descended. Chu Mu's expression changed. The pressure of the 8-fold sword formation crushed down and actually made his body sink. It was as if an invisible mountain was pressing down on him. That pressure came from all directions. It was as if it was everywhere. Moreover, a part of it was targeting his spiritual world. Compared to the 7-star sword formation, the pressure of the 8-fold sword formation was not only twice as strong, but also many times stronger. If I came here with the first transition of sword intent profound, I probably wouldn't be able to pass through the 8-fold sword formation. Chu Mu was secretly shocked. Until now, only one person has passed through the 7th stage of the puppet sword formation. That person is Xikongzhan, who has been the champion for 4 to 5 years. Today, can Chu Mu pass through the 7th stage of the puppet sword formation? The swordsmen were all extremely excited. Their faces were flushed red, and their eyes trembled. They were unable to move away as they stared at Chu Mu without blinking. Xikongzhan's generals were also staring at Chu Mu. They were secretly praying that Chu Mu would be defeated in the 8-fold sword formation. Once Chu Mu passed through the 8-fold sword formation, it meant that among the official disciples, besides Xikongzhan, there was a second person to pass through the 7th stage of the puppet sword formation. That would undoubtedly be a blow to Xikongzhan's position. Once Chu Mu passed through the 7th stage of the puppet sword formation, there would definitely be more rumors that Chu Mu had the qualifications to challenge Xikongzhan. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Qidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 664. Focusing all his attention and mobilizing all his power, Chu Mu forcibly resisted the pressure of the eightfold sword formation. Sword intent and tearing profound had reached the second transition, causing Chu Mu's spiritual world to become even more solid. Only then could he resist the pressure of the eightfold sword formation. The eightfold sword puppets move. Metal, wood, water, fire, earth, wind, ice, and thunder, completely different attributes and attacks, coordinated with each other. Heaven, earth, east, west, north, and south, all angles were covered without any blind spot. Under such circumstances, Chu Mu could not find an angle to dodge. He could only use his sword to block one of the swords and then get the chance to dodge. The sound of the air being pierced rang out. It was very subtle, but extremely sharp, causing people to tremble. The sword missed and instantly turned back. The eightfold sword formation operated like a terrible millstone crushing down, making Chu Mu feel hot, cold, numb, heavy, and so on. The mysteries of the eightfold sword formation were far superior to the 7 stars sword formation. With each stage of the puppet sword formation, the further it went, the greater the increase in power and the more tyrannical it became. Being in it, Chu Mu would feel the pressure increase with every breath, becoming more and more uncomfortable. This was not because the pressure had increased. The pressure of the eightfold sword formation did not change, but under the constant impact, Chu Mu's power was rapidly consumed, and his resistance was also decreasing bit by bit. Let's break the formation as soon as possible. After my strength increases, I'll try again to understand the mysteries of the eightfold sword formation. With a thought, Chu Mu suddenly burst out all his power and slashed out with his sword. It was like a flash of lightning, causing the sky to fall and the earth to crack. The terrifying power of the mountain-quaking energy was unbelievably tyrannical. With one slash, it broke the sword of one of the eightfold sword puppets, causing the sword to shake endlessly. Twisting his waist, his wrist did not move at all. His arm thrust forward and his sword stabbed out. This sword was like a meteor breaking the moon, extremely fast. The moment the tip of the sword touched the throat of the sword puppet, all the power poured into it and exploded. It was unbelievably tyrannical and immediately pierced through the sword puppet's neck. In an instant the pressure decreased. In every stage of the puppet sword array, the pressure would be the greatest when the sword puppets were complete, and the power would also be the greatest. Once one of the sword puppets was destroyed, the pressure would decrease, and the power would decrease as well. It wasn't as simple as using all of his strength to destroy one of the sword puppets, causing the power of the sword formation to decrease, and then breaking the formation. That wasn't something an ordinary person could do. More often than not, a full-powered attack without any regard for the consequences would also mean that there would be gaps in one's defense, which would make it easy for one to be counterattacked. Once one was injured, one's strength would also decrease accordingly. Moreover, to disregard everything and launch an all-out attack, it also required extremely brilliant eyesight and astonishing reaction speed, because the opportunity was fleeting. Attacking again, Chu Mu dodged and destroyed the second sword puppet. Finally, the eightfold sword puppets were defeated by Chu Mu's sword one by one, while Chu Mu's body was not damaged at all. However, it was not that easy, as his strength was almost exhausted. It's over. Chu Mu has passed the eightfold sword formation. After Xikongzhan, he's the second to pass through the eightfold sword formation. So to say, Chu Mu really has the strength to challenge Xikongzhan? Inconceivable, truly inconceivable. When Chu Mu declared that he would challenge Xikongzhan within half a year, I thought he was just bragging, but I didn't expect him to actually have the strength to challenge Xikongzhan. All kinds of discussions were heard, which immediately caused the faces of Sikong Zhan's generals to change. They were extremely unsightly, and their hearts were filled with unhappiness. Chu Mu's consumed strength quickly recovered. Under the respectful gazes of hundreds of thousands of swordsmen, he received the sky edge coins that he deserved. It was a total of 3,100, which could be considered a huge profit. Chu Mu took back the 100 sky edge coins and returned it to the swordsman who helped him sign up. That swordsman took the opportunity to ask to join the Ancient Sword Union and become a member. Chu Mu didn't object, and told him to go find Su Haosha. With 3,000 one-day sky edge coins, Chu Mu quickly left the Puppet Sword Array district and headed towards the Sword Tower district. Along the way, no one dared to challenge Chu Mu. After Sikong Zhan, he was the second person to pass the 7th level of the Puppet Sword Array. Such strength was extremely terrifying, and he was completely qualified to challenge Sikong Zhan. Who would dare to challenge him? Wasn't that just looking for a beating? After passing the 7th level of the Puppet Sword Array, Chu Mu's reputation had already reached the peak. If he wanted to take another step forward, he would either have to pass the 8th level of the Puppet Sword Array, or he would have to defeat Sikong Zhan. In the current Sky Edge Sword Palace, not only were the swordsmen from the 9 continents worshipping Chu Mu, but a portion of the swordsmen from the immemorial world had also become Chu Mu's admirers. Following that, even more shocking news spread. On the second day after Chu Mu passed the 7th level of the Puppet Sword Array, Qin Shanhe, who was ranked second among the official disciples, also went to challenge the Puppet Sword Array. He passed the 1st level, the 2nd level, the 3rd level, the 4th level, and the 5th level like a hot knife through butter. He took some time to pass the 6th level and entered the 7th level of the 8-fold sword array. After that, Qin Shanhe destroyed the 8-fold sword puppet in a domineering manner and successfully passed the 7th level of the puppet sword array. After Sikong Zhan and Chu Mu, Qin Shanhe was the 3rd swordsman to pass the 7th level of the puppet sword array. In an instant, Qin Shanhe's reputation was greatly shaken. Since more than a year ago, when Qin Shanhe challenged Sikong Zhan and lost, he disappeared without a trace. It was said that he had been engaging in life-and-death battles outside the Sky Edge Sword Palace. As time passed, although he was still ranked second among the official disciples, his reputation was not prominent. Especially with the recent rise of Chu Mu, who was in the limelight and overshadowed everything, Qin Shanhe was almost forgotten. Who would have thought that Qin Shanhe would return at this moment, and with such a strong return? Ranked second among the official disciples, Qin Shanhe. After hearing the news, Chu Mu smiled faintly. Among the top 10 official disciples, almost all of them had followers, but Qin Shanhe was an exception. He liked to travel alone and was rarely seen. Therefore, he did not recruit any followers. Qin Shanhe's strong return caused the bustling official disciples of the Sky Edge Sword Palace to erupt into a frenzy again. All kinds of topics about Sikong Zhan, Chu Mu, and Qin Shanhe kept appearing. Some people even compared the three of them. The last time Sikong Zhan challenged the Puppet Sword Array was a year and a half ago. At that time, he was able to pass the 8-fold sword array. After a year and a half, Sikong Zhan must be even stronger now. He might even be able to pass the 8th level of the Puppet Sword Array. Even if he can't pass the 8th level of the Puppet Sword Array, Sikong Zhan's strength is definitely much stronger than it was a year and a half ago. Although Chu Mu and Qin Shanhe are both strong, they are definitely not Sikong Zhan's match. It's hard to say. Chu Mu's rise is extremely fast. His strength usually increases by leaps and bounds in a short period of time. Qin Shanhe, on the other hand, returned with a strong return. Although he didn't challenge the 8th level of the Puppet Sword Array, he probably didn't use his full strength when he challenged the 7th level. The voices of discussion were divided into a few factions. One faction leaned towards Sikong Zhan, one faction leaned towards Chu Mu, and one faction leaned towards Qin Shanha. Because of the three of them, there were even many swordsmen who argued until their faces turned red and started fighting. However, among the three people in the center of the storm, Xikongzhan was still in seclusion and didn't know anything. Chu Mu had been staying in the sword tower all this while. As for Qin Shanha, he had also returned to the sword tower after challenging the puppet sword array and didn't step out. Another 5 days passed. The various discussions and arguments showed signs of decreasing slightly. However, there was another explosive piece of news that caused the various discussions and arguments to become even more heated. The first battle general of the 13 battle generals under Xikongzhan's command, Fei Kong, had successfully passed the 7th level of the puppet sword array, the eightfold sword array. Without a doubt, the support for Xikongzhan's side was even greater because of this. The 13 battle generals were all extremely happy. Fei Kang's battle results caused their faces to glow with radiance. "Big brother, you did well." The second battle general was too excited. He didn't know what to say and could only repeat the same sentence. "Big brother has passed the 7th level of the puppet sword array. He won't let Chu Mu and Qin Shanha take all the glory," the 7th battle general said with a smile. "Did you see that? The first battle general under Lord Xikongzhan has passed the 7th level of the puppet sword array. He isn't inferior to Chu Mu and Qin Shanha at all." "That's right. Even a battle general under Lord Xikongzhan's command has achieved such results, let alone Lord Xikongzhan himself, who is much stronger than the 13 battle generals combined. His strength is definitely not something Chu Mu and Qin Shanha can compare to." These words immediately caused the supporters of Chu Mu and Qin Shanha to furiously refute. The people of the Ancient Sword Alliance had been very excited. The current Ancient Sword Alliance had more than 5,000 members. The reason why these people joined the Ancient Sword Alliance was because of Chu Mu's fame. Some people thought that even if Chu Mu wasn't as good as Xikongzhan, he could definitely catch up to Xikongzhan with the talent and potential that he had displayed. He might even surpass Xikongzhan in time. An organization that had such a person as the Grand Elder would definitely have astonishing potential. Apart from that, there were also some people who had achieved good results in the puppet sword array. For example, there was someone who had passed the 6th level of the puppet sword array. If it were any other time, it would definitely cause a sensation. Unfortunately, the timing wasn't right. They were completely overshadowed by Chu Mu, Qin Shanha, Fei Kong, and Xikongzhan. There was no other way. At this time, no one wanted to compete with Chu Mu, Qin Shanha, and the others unless they could also pass the 7th level of the puppet sword array. However, the 7th level of the puppet sword array, the eightfold sword array, was extremely powerful. It was too difficult to pass it. Many ambitious genius swordsmen looked at it and sighed. If they wanted to pass the 7th level of the puppet sword array, they would need at least a few years of cultivation. Perhaps by that time they would have already become elite disciples. To Chu Mu, all the arguments and discussions in the outside world had nothing to do with him. Every time he heard Jiang Chuan say something, he would just laugh it off. Everything was just an empty reputation. Only one's own strength was the way to go. Time passed. In the blink of an eye, another 10 days had passed. Chu Mu's sword gauntlet welcomed a person that exceeded Chu Mu's expectations. "If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Qidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation." Chapter 665. Qin Shanha personally came to look for Chu Mu. This was somewhat out of Chu Mu's expectations. Qin Shanha's body was tall and strong, close to 2 meters tall. His body had a strong murderous aura. His appearance was rough, and the lines of his face were distinct. He looked very masculine and domineering. His eyes were bright and sharp, and there was even a trace of murderous aura. When he glanced at them, Jiang Chuan and Ding Xian couldn't help but tremble. They subconsciously took 2 steps back and looked at Qin Shanhe cautiously. A feeling of fear emerged from the bottom of their hearts. It was as if they were prey targeted by a fierce tiger. Qin Shanhe's gaze didn't linger on Ding Xian and Jiang Chuan. It directly landed on Chu Mu's face. His eyes suddenly became brighter and sharper. A terrifying murderous aura shot out, causing Ding Xian and Jiang Chuan's expressions to change drastically. They almost suffocated. Chu Mu, who bore the brunt of it, raised his eyebrows slightly. Qin Shanhe's murderous aura was too strong. Under the impact, he felt as if he was in a killing field. He couldn't help but sigh. Who knew how much blood Qin Shanhe's hands were stained with? Who knew how many lives his sword had taken? In terms of murderous aura, Chu Mu was far inferior to Qin Shanhe. However, in terms of the strength of his spiritual will, Qin Shanhe couldn't compare to Chu Mu. Therefore, under the impact of Qin Shanhe's murderous aura, Chu Mu's expression didn't change at all. It was as if the suffocating murderous aura was just a breeze. The murderous aura couldn't shake Chu Mu at all. Qin Shanhe restrained his murderous aura, but there were still traces of it around his body. It was terrifying. Qin Shanhe. Qin Shanhe pointed at himself with his thumb and said to Chu Mu loudly. Chu Mu. Chu Mu's tone was indifferent. You really live up to your reputation. I came at the right time. Qin Shanhe laughed heartily. Sit. Chu Mu gestured for Qin Shanhe to sit down. Ding Xian and Jiang Chuan took the opportunity to leave. They felt very uncomfortable in front of Qin Shanhe. Their bodies were tense and their hair stood on end. It was as if Qin Shanhe would attack at any time. This was because Qin Shanhe was extremely powerful, and after a long period of battle and slaughter, the aura on his body was extremely terrifying. He himself was unable to control it perfectly, and the portion that leaked out made Ding Xian and Jiang Chuan, who were far weaker than him, unable to remain calm. After Ding Xian and Jiang Chuan left, only Chu Mu and Qin Shanhe were left in the Sword Tower's main hall. Qin Shanhe kept staring at Chu Mu as if he wanted to see through all of Chu Mu's secrets. However, no matter how hard he looked, he couldn't see anything. The more he looked, the more confused he became. Once Qin Shanhe returned to the Sky Edge Sword Palace, he immediately challenged the 7th stage of the puppet sword formation. After he passed it, he returned to his own sword tower. At the same time, he also found out about the major events that happened in the Sword Palace while he was away. Chu Mu, who was in the limelight, was naturally the focus of his attention. After that, Qin Shanhe found out all sorts of information about Chu Mu, which immediately surprised him. At the same time, it also made him interested and wanted to investigate. Hence, he found time to visit Chu Mu personally. I heard that you received the unparalleled sword technique glory. Then your sword technique attainments must be very high. Qin Shanhe went straight to the point and said, I hope that you can spar with me. Spar with you? Chu Mu was a little surprised. He guessed that Qin Shanhe had come personally to spar with him. After all, he had been in the limelight recently and had passed the 7th stage of the puppet sword formation. Qin Shanhe had also passed the 7th stage of the puppet sword formation. He didn't expect that Qin Shanhe's purpose was to have a sword duel with him. When Chu Mu first saw Qin Shanhe, he felt that he was a good person and could be friends with him. Hence, when Qin Shanhe asked for a sword duel, Chu Mu agreed without hesitation. All right, straightforward. Qin Shanhe laughed heartily. Both of them arrived at the first level of the sword tower. A sword duel wouldn't use sword origin, sword will, or ultimacy. Hence, the first level of the sword tower was enough. Qin Shanhe was tall and strong. His sword was also quite unique. It was a huge sword that was as wide as a palm and 1.5 meters long. He held it in his right hand. The tip of the sword was wider than the body of the sword by a finger. It looked especially sharp and shone with a cold light. It was dazzling. As he waved it gently, the sword gave off a low whistle. It showed that Qin Shanha's arm strength was amazing. At the same time, it also let Chu Mu know that the huge sword was shockingly heavy. With the huge sword in his hand, Qin Shanha's aura suddenly changed. It was as if he was a mountain, standing tall and unmoving. "Take my sword," he shouted in a low voice. It was like the roar of thunder, exploding in Chu Mu's ears. If one's spiritual will wasn't strong enough, they would definitely be dizzy under this low roar. They would be at Qin Shanha's mercy. Qin Shanha took a step forward. It was as if he was shooting an arrow. The huge sword pierced through the air and pierced towards Chu Mu with an earth-shattering force. It made Chu Mu feel as if a mountain was crashing towards him and a terrifying huge wave was crashing towards him. With the huge sword as the center, the space within a 3-meter radius seemed to be affected by a strange force and became distorted. The power of the sword technique territory. Level 3. Chu Mu's pupils shrank and shot out a sharp light. No wonder Qin Shanha proposed a sword duel. It turned out that his sword skills had already reached the 3rd level of the sword technique territory. At his age, there were very few swordsmen who had reached the 3rd level of the sword technique territory. Every one of them could be considered a sword genius. No wonder Qin Shanha had such confidence. Chu Mu's footsteps seemed to be gliding on ice. In an instant, his footsteps changed smoothly. The 8-sided desolation sword was unsheathed and stabbed out at an angle that Qin Shanha didn't expect. It was as if it came from outer space, cutting through the weakest part of the huge sword and stabbing towards Qin Shanha. Qin Shanha was delighted. He moved his sword with both hands. The huge sword instantly drew circles one after another. The power of the 3rd level of the sword technique territory spread out like ripples, layer by layer. It affected Chu Mu's sword and caused it to deviate. Chu Mu's body seemed to have become weightless. His body moved with the sword and instantly passed by Qin Shanha. He flew back in midair and slashed out with his sword, aiming at Qin Shanha's forehead. Qin Shanha used the 3rd level of the sword technique territory. Chu Mu also used the 3rd level of the sword technique territory. Qin Shanha only felt that his forehead was locked on by a sharp intent. If he wasn't careful, half of his head would be cut off. However, he wasn't afraid at all. Instead, he revealed an excited smile. He lifted his foot and landed heavily on the ground. There was a faint boom, as if the entire sword tower was shaking. Then, a terrifying aura spread out from Qin Shanha's foot. Qin Shanha used that foot as the center of gravity and twisted his body. His power exploded. He moved the huge sword with both hands and swept it horizontally. It was as if he wanted to cut a mountain in half. The terrifying sword wind mixed with the power of the 3rd level of the sword technique territory and crushed towards Chu Mu. Suddenly, Chu Mu's body swayed. He was like a small boat in a stormy sea. In an instant, Chu Mu's mind moved. His body was like a feather, flying and swaying under the impact of the strong wind. However, he wouldn't be blown away by the strong wind. Instead, he was controlled within a certain range. The tip of his foot lightly touched the tip of the huge sword that Qin Shanha had slashed horizontally. His body skyrocketed, and he slashed down with his sword. Qin Shanha's body leaned back and slid backward rapidly, causing Chu Mu's sword to miss. At the same time, the huge sword slashed upwards in an almost impossible way. Chu Mu moved his sword and broke the huge sword. He used the momentum to soar into the sky and turned around. Like a falling meteor, his sword turned into a dazzling arc of light in Qin Shanha's eyes. Good timing! Qin Shanha roared and stomped heavily on the ground. His body soared into the sky. The huge sword danced around his body. It was airtight. His entire body was like a ball of sword light, crushing towards Chu Mu. They collided in midair. Both of them flew backward. Their bodies paused, and they used the momentum to turn around and close in on each other again. It had to be said that Qin Shanha's swordsmanship was indeed very profound. If it wasn't for the fact that Chu Mu's swordsmanship came from the Sky-Edge Sword Palace and improved time after time, he might not have been Qin Shanhe's opponent in the past. Even now, Chu Mu could only fight Qin Shanhe to a draw with only the third level of the sword technique domain and his single sword. Of course, this was also because Chu Mu had only used 80% of his strength. It was because it was rare for him to meet an opponent like Qin Shanhe who had such profound swordsmanship. The more Qin Shanhe fought, the more excited he became. He also rarely met an opponent who could compete with him in swordsmanship. At the same time, he was very surprised. This was because he had already displayed all his swordsmanship abilities, but he still couldn't do anything to Chu Mu. It was as if Chu Mu's swordsmanship was a bottomless pit. No matter how much he improved, he still couldn't do anything to him. It was also because of this that Qin Shanhe became more and more excited. Under the pressure of Chu Mu, his potential was slowly being released. On the first level of the sword tower, two figures were sometimes fast and sometimes slow. Sometimes they crossed each other, and sometimes they collided and flew back. Two sword light, one big and one small, one thick and one thin, collided with each other. Qin Shanhe's swordsmanship was wide open, appearing strong and domineering. It also had a majestic aura that could contain mountains and rivers. Especially when it was combined with the power of the sword technique domain, it was very obvious that the power was multiplied. Sword pointing at mountains and rivers. Qin Shanhe's swordsmanship opened Chu Mu's eyes once again. In the direction of the sword technique domain, he could see even further. Qin Shanhe should also have an inheritance of sword principle. It should be a sword principle similar to the mountain sword principle, which is why it can have such power. As Chu Mu fought with Qin Shanhe, he thought to himself, integrating the essence of the sword principle into the sword technique domain will increase the power of the sword technique domain. It's a pity that I don't have a sword principle now. Although Chu Mu, who was determined to create his own sword principle, had already embarked on this path, he still didn't have a clue until now. He also knew that it was because he didn't have enough experience, didn't understand enough, and wasn't at a high enough level. The most important thing was that he hadn't encountered the right opportunity. Creating one's own sword principle was originally extremely difficult, and it usually took a lot of time. In this battle, Chu Mu and Qin Shanhe fought for more than 2 hours. They were both satisfied and exhausted a lot of their physical strength. Great! Qin Shanhe laughed. Chu Mu exhaled, and there was also a smile on his face that came from the bottom of his heart. I heard that you planned to challenge that pretty boy, Xikongzhan? After Qin Shanhe finished laughing, he looked at Chu Mu and said, Then you will be ranked after me. I will challenge Xikongzhan first, and the time will be 1 month later. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Qidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 666. After this battle, Chu Mu and Qin Shanhe established a friendship. It was the kind of friendship where they were both friends and opponents. Qin Shanhe was very direct and did not beat around the bush. However, he was not a violent person. He was a bit of a wise man. After the battle with Chu Mu, Qin Shanhe said that he had learned something and wanted to go back and comprehend it carefully. He said goodbye. Challenge Xikongzhan. Chu Mu smiled slightly. That's good too. Before I challenge Xikongzhan, you challenge him first. Let me see how strong Xikongzhan is. After Qin Shanhe left Chu Mu's sword gauntlet, there was no news about him. He had been staying in his sword gauntlet to cultivate. On one hand, he was absorbing what he had learned from the battle with Chu Mu. On the other hand, he was trying his best to improve himself. On the other hand, he was adjusting his mental state to prepare for the challenge. Chu Mu and Qin Shanhe's sword fight was something only they knew about. Otherwise, if word got out, it would probably cause another heated discussion. In the blink of an eye, half a month had passed. The discussion about Xikongzhan, Chu Mu, and Qin Shanhe finally died down a lot. Only a few people would mention it again. However, it was only a verbal argument and would not escalate to the level of fighting. In this half a month, Chu Mu had been cultivating. However, he still had not reached the third turn of sword intent and profound. However, he had become much more profound in the second turn. As for the research of the third hand gesture, he had also achieved some result. There was still a long way to go before he could complete it. During this time, Qin Shanhe came to the sword gauntlet to find Chu Mu and had a sword duel. During the duel, Chu Mu could feel that Qin Shanhe's sword arts had improved, and Chu Mu had also gained something from it. After chatting for a while, Chu Mu also learned about the situation outside the Sky Edge Sword Palace from Qin Shanhe. The Sky Edge Sword Palace was located in a small corner of the immemorial world. Outside the Sky Edge Sword Palace there were all kinds of terrains. There were many immemorial ferocious beasts and various races. It was very dangerous. As for Qin Shanhe, he had survived in such an environment for more than a year. It was precisely because he was constantly in danger that he was able to develop his potential. That was why his strength had increased tremendously in the past year. Sir's aura has become even more obscure and even more frightening. The number 1 battle general, Fei Kong, looked at the person sitting high above. His heart trembled, and he didn't dare to look directly at that figure. The other battle generals of the 13 battle generals all bowed their heads, not daring to say a word. They even subconsciously controlled their breathing, making it very light and slow. Their hearts were filled with reverence and awe for the person sitting at the head of the table. This person had a head full of long black hair and a gorgeous golden ceremonial crown on his head. His face was fair without any facial hair, like a gentle and flawless jade. His eyebrows were like swords, carrying a trace of fierceness, and his eyes were as bright as the stars. His facial features matched perfectly, giving off a natural feeling. It was perfect. Just by looking at his appearance, people would think that he was a perfect person, and many people would involuntarily feel inferior. The number 1 official disciple of the Sky Edge Sword Palace, Sikong Zhan. Sikong Zhan sat on his high seat and looked down at his 13 generals. His gaze was indifferent, like a high and mighty god. The aura on his body was completely restrained and did not leak out in the slightest. His starry robe made him look even more profound. "Tell me, what happened when I was in seclusion?" Sikong Zhan said slowly. His tone was neither cold nor warm, with a trace of aloofness and indifference. It carried an invisible aura that made people unconsciously feel that they were inferior. The attitude of the 13 battle generals became even more humble. Sikong Zhan had started his seclusion a few months ago. He knew that the swordsmen of the 9 continents had come to the ancient world and entered the Sky Edge Sword Palace. He also knew that Chu Mu had made a name for himself, because he was the one who had ordered his subordinates to recruit Chu Mu. However, he had started his seclusion after giving the order, so he knew nothing of what had happened afterwards. "My lord, when you were in seclusion, a few major events happened." The number 1 battle general, Fei Kong, took a small step forward and hurriedly spoke of all the major events that had happened in the past few months. Chu Mu has passed the 7th level of the sword puppet formation. He is indeed a rare talent and has great potential. Sikong Zhan nodded imperceptibly. His tone had the flavor of a senior talking to a junior. "However, isn't it a little too self-confident to threaten to challenge me?" "We also think so. Although this Chu Mu's talent isn't bad and his strength is increasing rapidly, compared to senior, he's still far from you," Fei Kong said. In addition, Qin Shanhe has also passed the 7th level of the sword puppet formation. According to my guess, if Qin Shanhe knows that you have come out of seclusion, he will most likely challenge you. Qin Shanhe is just a loser. Sikong Zhan's expression did not change. He then looked at Fei Kong. "Fei Kong, your strength has increased a lot. Yes, my lord. I have also passed the 7th level of the sword puppet formation. Fei Kang's tone was a little excited. Very good. If Qin Shanhe challenges you, you will deal with him, Sikongjian said. After a few months of seclusion, Sikongjian's strength had increased again. He looked down on Qin Shanhe, who had passed the 7th level of the sword puppet formation. Unless Qin Shanhe could defeat Fei Kang, he was not qualified to challenge Sikongjian. Yes, my lord, Fei Kang said firmly. Sikongjian stood up and strode out with his hands behind his back. He headed towards the sword puppet formation area. The 13 generals quickly followed behind him like loyal guard. The 13 generals were protecting Sikongjian. It was too obvious. Immediately, it attracted the attention of many swordsmen. The news of Sikongjian's reappearance spread quickly. In a short period of time, it almost spread to the entire official disciple area of the Sky Edge Sword Palace. Most of the official disciples knew that Sikongjian had come out of seclusion and that he was heading towards the sword puppet formation area. Grand Elder. Chu Mu's bedroom door was knocked. The sound was urgent, indicating that the person who knocked was anxious. What is it? Chu Mu's voice came from the bedroom. Sikongjian has come out of seclusion. He is going to challenge the sword puppet formation, Jiang Chuan quickly said. I know, Chu Mu answered. He then opened the door and strode out. He left the sword tower with Jiang Chuan and quickly headed towards the sword puppet formation area. Watching Sikongjian challenge the sword puppet formation was also a way to understand his strength. As a strong opponent that he wanted to challenge, Chu Mu had a high opinion of Sikongjian. When Chu Mu and Jiang Chuan arrived at the sword puppet formation area, it was already packed with people. It was so packed that it was almost impossible to squeeze in. Standing at the back, there was no way to see Sikongjian challenge the sword puppet formation. It had to be said that among the official disciples of the Sky Edge Sword Palace, Sikongjian's reputation was the strongest. It was far from what Chu Mu and Qin Shanhe could compare with. It was obvious just by looking at the scene before them. Chu Mu used the flying swan illusory steps and immediately entered the crowd. It was as if the dense crowd couldn't obstruct him. He was like a fish swimming in water as he rapidly moved forward. Jiang Chuan was helpless against the scene before him. He could only stand outside and desperately squeeze in. Following the direction of the crowd, Chu Mu shuttled through the crowd. After a while, he arrived beside the sword puppet formation that Sikongjian wanted to challenge. He could clearly see the sword puppet formation. A figure walked out from among the 13 generals. It was as if he had walked down from a throne. He had a lofty temperament, causing the bustling atmosphere around to subconsciously quiet down, giving rise to a sense of disparity. It was as if that person was an existence that they could not catch up to no matter how hard they tried. What a strong aura! Chu Mu couldn't help but be secretly surprised. Although it was the first time he saw him, Chu Mu could tell that he was Sikongjian with a single glance. A strong aura and an incomparable posture. Just by looking at his back, it made people feel like they were looking up to him. Fortunately, Chu Mu's mental power was strong enough and wasn't affected. He looked at the other swordsmen and saw that each of them had a look of admiration. Taking a step forward, Sikongjian walked into the sword puppet formation. The first stage of the sword puppet formation, yin-yang sword formation. The yin-yang sword puppets were instantly activated. However, they stopped the moment they were activated because they were destroyed by Sikongjian's sword in an extremely tyrannical manner. At that moment the sword was extremely fast. Other than Chu Mu, no one else could see it clearly. It felt as if the yin-yang sword puppets had collapsed on their own. Sikongjian entered the second stage of the sword puppet formation. The tripartite sword formation still didn't put any pressure on Sikongjian. The tripartite sword formation's tripartite sword puppets were easily defeated at the same time. Sikongjian broke through the sword puppet formation as if he was taking a stroll in the park. He was very calm and relaxed. In the third stage of the sword formation of 4 symbols, the sword puppets of 4 symbols were also defeated at the same time. In the fourth stage of the sword formation of 5 elements, the sword puppets of 5 elements were also unable to escape the fate of the other sword puppets. They were instantly defeated by Sikongjan. It was as if Sikongjan had only used one sword. Entering the 5th stage, hexagonal sword formation, Chu-Mu had been staring at Sikongjan. Every time Sikongjan made a move, Chu-Mu could see his sword light, but it was rather blurry. It was very fast, so fast that it surprised Chu-Mu. He concluded that Sikongjan's swordsmanship attainments must be very high. The hexagonal sword formation still couldn't stop Sikongjan's footsteps in the slightest. He easily broke through it and entered the 6th stage of the sword puppet formation, the 7 stars sword formation. The pressure of the 7 stars sword formation began to target the spiritual world. But for Sikongjan, this kind of pressure was nothing. It was just that at this stage, the swordsmen around finally saw Sikongjan make a move. Because Sikongjan was also unable to destroy the 7 stars sword puppet with one sword. Sikongjan easily defeated the 7 stars sword puppet and broke into the 7th stage of the sword puppet formation, the 8-fold sword formation. Facing the increasingly powerful pressure and the ever-changing attacks of the 8-fold sword puppet, Sikongjan didn't dodge or defend. Instead, he used a very direct method. With an extremely tyrannical and overbearing stance, he met force with force and defeated all the 8-fold sword puppet. The 8th stage of the sword puppet formation, 9 revolutions sword formation. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 667. Puppet Sword Array 8th Stage. 9-turn sword array. Sikongjan appeared in the middle of the sword formation, and the 9 sword puppets were activated. Under the drive of different profound meanings, they displayed different attacking styles. Violent, fast, continuous, tough, cold, heavy, and so on. At that moment, Sikongjan was crushed by the incomparably powerful pressure. All the swordsmen's gazes were attracted by Sikongjan in the sword array. Even with Sikongjan's strength, facing the powerful pressure of the 9-turn sword array, he couldn't break it in a short time. However, Sikongjan stood on the spot without moving. He held the sword in his right hand and blocked the attacks of the 9-turn sword puppets again and again. He deflected every sword attack. This was Sikongjan's first time challenging the 9-turn sword array. Time passed slowly. The spectating swordsmen all held their breaths and stared without blinking, afraid to miss the exciting moment. After about 15 minutes, Sikongjan seemed to have found the secret of the 9-turn sword array. After deflecting the attacks of the 9-turn sword puppets, he changed from defense to offense and burst out with power. With one sword, he destroyed a 9-turn sword puppet along with its sword. It was extremely powerful. Advanced stage. Advanced stage. Advanced stage. Chu-Mu's pupils instantly contracted. Among all the swordsmen present, no one could compare to Chu-Mu in terms of eyesight. In that instant, Chu-Mu saw Sikongjan's sword burst out with a terrifying power. That power was concentrated at one point and burst out. It was obvious that it had reached the advanced stage. Advanced stage. This level was similar to Chu-Mu. The 9-turn sword array was instantly defeated by Sikongjan's overbearing attitude. Sikongjan had passed the 9-turn sword array. He passed. Sikongjan has created a new record. I wonder if he will continue to challenge the next sword array. Just as the swordsmen were discussing, Sikongjan gave up on the last sword array because the 9-turn sword array had consumed too much of his power. He didn't have the confidence to challenge the last sword array. Leaving the sword array in a calm manner, Sikongjan had an indifferent expression as if the countless swordsmen around him were just illusions. Wherever he passed, people consciously made way for Sikongjan to leave. One of the 13 generals went to collect the sky edge coins that Sikong Zhan deserved for passing the 8th stage of the puppet sword array. 6,003 sky edge coins, plus the 100 that he took back the registration fee, a total of 6,004 sky edge coins. Like I said, Sikong Zhan is the strongest. What Chu Mu? What Qin Shanhe? There is no comparison at all. Sikong Zhan is indeed powerful. As soon as he came out of seclusion, he used an absolute stance to let Chu Mu, Qin Shanhe, and the others understand that he is the true number one official disciple, a powerful existence that no one can shake. Sikong Zhan's strength is even stronger than before. Once he becomes an elite disciple, he will probably immediately obtain the qualifications to form a battle team. After the news of Sikong Zhan passing the 8th stage of the puppet sword formation spread, the quiet official disciple area of the Sky Edge Sword Palace immediately became lively once more. Without a doubt, the strength Sikong Zhan revealed had already caused others to feel shock and even despair, and it was far beyond their reach. At this moment, an even more explosive piece of news spread. Qin Shanhe had issued a challenge card to Sikong Zhan. Looks like Qin Shanhe still hasn't given up. He actually dares to challenge Sikong Zhan. More than a year ago, Qin Shanhe was defeated by Sikong Zhan's sword, and he was easily defeated by Sikong Zhan. More than a year later, Qin Shanhe's strength has increased a lot, and so has Sikong Zhan. Qin Shanhe is definitely no match for Sikong Zhan. He's asking for humiliation. Suddenly, after the news of Qin Shanhe issuing a challenge card to Sikong Zhan spread, no one was optimistic about Qin Shanhe. This was because Qin Shanhe had only passed the 7th stage of the puppet sword formation, while Sikong Zhan had passed the 8th stage. There was only one stage between the 7th and 8th stage, but the difference in difficulty was several times greater. This meant that the difference in strength between the swordsmen was also several times greater. In response to Qin Shanhe's challenge card, Sikong Zhan also responded. Qin Shanhe had to first defeat his number one combat general, Fei Kong, to prove that he was qualified to challenge Sikong Zhan. Qin Shanhe's duel with Fei Kong was set for 2 days later. When the time was up, the arena was filled with swordsmen. Although Sikong Zhan did not personally fight, his number one combat general, Fei Kong, was also extraordinary. Qin Shanhe had passed the 7th stage of the puppet sword formation, and Fei Kong had also passed the 7th stage. Between the two of them, who was stronger? Did Qin Shanhe have the qualifications to make Sikong Zhan fight? All kinds of questions tugged at the hearts of the swordsmen. Chu Mu was also present. Su Haosha and the others were also present. A battle like this was usually very rare. If they did not watch, they would miss out on a good opportunity. On the arena, Qin Shanhe and Fei Kong faced each other from afar. Their swords were already unsheathed and held in their hands. Fei Kang's sword was slanted to the ground, while Qin Shanhe's sword was on his shoulder. Sikong Zhan was not present. In his eyes, a battle of this level was not enough to attract his attention. Was there a need for a referee? No, the audience was the best referee. When the battle began, Fei Kong and Qin Shanhe moved together. Their first action was to rush forward and draw their swords. A strong wind whistled. It was brought about by Qin Shanhe's giant sword. It was like a storm rushing forward. The sword light pierced through the air. It was very dazzling. It cut through the sky and left a trail in the air. It was Fei Kang's sword. In an instant, the sword light and the storm collided. Crackling sounds rang out and exploded. Countless strong winds wreaked havoc, rushing in all directions. In the blazing heat, Fei Kong and Qin Shanhe's swords collided for the first time. Strength against strength, strength against strength. In just an instant, Fei Kang's sword turned and became soft. It whipped towards Qin Shanhe's face like a willow branch. Qin Shanhe's head leaned back. His right hand exerted force, and the giant sword suddenly trembled. There was a faint shadow of vibration power within. tyrannical power exploded and instantly shook Fei Kang's sword away. Then, he kicked out and swept the giant sword. The terrifying sword wind caused Fei Kang to quickly retreat. His body dissipated like smoke in an instant. It was as if a gust of wind had blown past. Fei Kang's body strangely reappeared on Qin Shanha's right side, just in time to swing his sword. At the right time, Fei Kang used the power of realm entry. The power of his sword was pushed to the limit. The timing of this sword was accurate. The angle was even more amazing. Many swordsmen even felt that Qin Shanha was in danger. However, in an instant, Qin Shanha's body fell to the side. His legs did not move at all. It looked as if his entire body was broken. It was very strange. Using this method, Qin Shanha dodged Fei Kang's sure-kill sword. He raised his giant sword and also used the realm entry sword to kill. Fei Kang's body seemed to have been split apart. Once again, he turned into smoke that was blown by the wind and dispersed. In a short period of time, Fei Kang and Qin Shanha both used their true strength to fight. Their battle did not look as magnificent as the battle between swordsmen on the ancient sword continent. However, the danger was 10 times greater. The power of each sword was even more tyrannical. This was because the power was contained in the sword and not released outward. Qin Shanha was strong and domineering, but there were also traces of flexibility. Under the giant sword, the mountains and rivers were under his control. On the other hand, Fei Kang was unpredictable and unpredictable. The swordsmen were mesmerized by the battle between the two of them. In terms of sword will and profound, both of them had reached the second transition. In terms of cultivation, both of them were at the peak of the complete origin realm. In terms of power control, both of them had reached the initial realm entry level. It could be said that the two of them were very close in strength. However, in terms of swordsmanship, Fei Kang had only reached the second level of the sword technique domain. On the other hand, Qin Shanha had reached the third level. Gradually, Fei Kang's sword technique domain was suppressed by Fei Kang. "I wonder who will win?" Su Haoshao whispered. "Fei Kang's defeat is only a matter of time," Chu Mu said calmly. Qin Shanha and Chu Mu had fought twice in swordsmanship. Each time, Qin Shanha had improved. He was much better than Fei Kang. Mountains and rivers were under the sword. Qin Shanha roared. An illusion of mountains and rivers seemed to appear on the giant sword. As the sword slashed down, the sword technique domain's power was pushed to the limit. The surrounding space was affected. Fei Kang's body was constantly being pulled, as if he was in a turbulent flow. Fei Kang was a little slower. He had no choice but to raise his sword to block Qin Shanha's giant sword. Under the explosion of power, Fei Kang was sent flying. The tyrannical power continued to attack, causing Fei Kang's chest to feel pressured. Qin Shanha waved his sword again. Sword rays that were as powerful as mountains poured out like flowing water, bombarding Fei Kang's body. Fei Kang's injuries worsened as he was sent flying out of the arena. He couldn't help but spit out a mouthful of blood. His face was pale and his robe was torn. If it wasn't for the protection of his armor, he would have been seriously injured and on the verge of death. "You've won. I will tell Lord Sikongzhan," Fei Kang said to Qin Shanha, who was on the arena, as he wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth. Qin Shanha didn't answer. He was adjusting his breath. It wasn't easy for him to win against Fei Kang. Firstly, his sword technique was better than Fei Kang's. Secondly, he had gone through more than a year of continuous life and death battles, which was something Fei Kang couldn't compare with. These two conditions were the final factors that determined his victory. Fei Kang left with the rest of the 13 warriors. Qin Shanha also jumped off the arena and walked towards Chu Mu. "Next is the battle with Sikongzhan. However, I don't have the confidence to defeat him." Qin Shanha walked to Chu Mu's side and said in a low voice, "When the time comes, you can take the opportunity to see Sikongzhan's technique. It will be beneficial for you to challenge him." Chu Mu nodded. "I'll leave first." Qin Shanha turned and left. The crowd dispersed, and the swordsmen left the arena one after another. The news about the battle between Qin Shanha and Fei Kong spread like a storm, reaching many people's ears. He can actually defeat you. Sikong Zhan stood under the sky with his hands behind his back. Make the arrangements. 3 days later, at the #1 arena, I await Qin Shanha's challenge. Yes. The 13 warriors immediately spread the news, and one of them went to Qin Shanha's sword tower to inform Qin Shanha that 3 days later, he would be able to fight Sikong Zhan to determine who was better. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 668. 3 days was actually very short. It passed in the blink of an eye. But at this moment, many swordsmen felt that 3 days was very long. It was as if it had been extended by 100 or 1,000 times. It made them feel like a year. This was because these swordsmen all hoped that 3 days would pass quickly so that they could watch the battle between Qin Shanha and Sikong Zhan. The second official disciple challenging the first official disciple. A battle between the strongest official disciples. No matter which title it was very attractive. For 3 days, Qin Shanha did not leave his house. He stayed in his sword tower and constantly adjusted his condition. 3 days passed quickly. No matter how hard he tried, he could not improve his strength. Since that was the case, it was not good for him to adjust his condition. He adjusted his essence, energy, and spirit to the peak so that he could use all his strength in the battle with Sikong Zhan. Even if he lost in the end, he would have no regret. In comparison, although Chu Mu also wanted to watch the battle between Qin Shanha and Sikong Zhan, he was not in a hurry. His own strength was the most important. Chu Mu, who had 3,500 sky edge coins, went to the sword hoard area again. He planned to choose another technique related to the mind. His mind tempering technique had already been completed. Now it only had the effect of recovering the mind. Moreover, a stronger mind would directly improve the refinement of sword intent and esoteric meaning, making it more efficient. When he entered the sword hoard area for the 3rd time, a strong pressure surrounded his body. It was obvious that the pressure was aimed at the mind. This kind of pressure was completely negligible to Chu Mu. After entering the 1st level of the sword hoard, Chu Mu did not stop and went straight to the 2nd level. The pressure on the 2nd level was much stronger than the 1st, but Chu Mu could still resist it easily. As long as he wanted to, he could stay in the 2nd level for as long as he wanted. His mental remembrance spread out and transformed into strands of light that touched the surrounding light orbs. Chu Mu began to search. Different techniques emitted different auras. There seemed to be countless light balls in the 2nd level of the sword hoard. It was like looking for a needle in a haystack to find a suitable technique. Fortunately, Chu Mu could multitask and greatly increased the efficiency of his search. Every time his spiritual consciousness came into contact with a light ball, the corresponding Chu Mu would know what kind of cultivation method was in the light ball. As he searched, Chu Mu grasped some patterns. For example, the auras emitted by cultivation methods that were also related to psychic power were often more similar. As a result, Chu Mu's search efficiency increased again. There were relatively few techniques related to spiritual will. Time passed slowly, and soon 15 minutes had passed. Chu Mu didn't find a satisfactory cultivation technique. Could it be that I have to go to the 3rd floor? After searching for a while, Chu Mu decided to go to the 3rd level of the sword hoard. The pressure on the 3rd level of the sword hoard was even greater, and Chu Mu began to feel uncomfortable, but he was still able to withstand it. While circulating mind-tempering technique to recover the mental strength he had expended, he also spread out his mental strength to sense the surroundings. As time passed, more and more of his mental strength was consumed, and the pressure he felt increased. The recovery speed of mind-tempering skill was far from being able to keep up with the consumption rate caused by the pressure of the third level of the sword horde. Persevere, persevere. Finally, Chu Mu sensed a light ball. The aura made him happy. When his mind touched it, a simple message was transmitted to his mind. Chu Mu immediately made a decision to choose this cultivation method. That piece of information also included the amount of sky edge coins needed to be paid for this cultivation technique. 3,000. Without hesitation, Chu Mu took out 3,000 sky edge coins. In the next moment, the 3,000 sky edge coins disappeared without a trace, and the light ball touched Chu Mu's forehead. A stream of information flowed from the light ball into Chu Mu's mind like water. The Sky Edge Sword Palace had a clear rule that any cultivation method obtained from the sword horde could only be cultivated by oneself and could not be passed on to other swordsmen. This practice was to encourage swordsmen to earn their own living. If you want a cultivation method, you have to pay Sky Edge coins. If you don't have enough Sky Edge coins, you have to find a way to earn them. Everything depends on your own ability. A direct method like this also had corresponding protective measures. For example, the total number of people who exchanged for the cultivation method, and so on. This was equivalent to a record that could be checked directly. Of course, if a swordsman had the ability to modify the cultivation method obtained from the sword horde and make it his own, then he could pass it on to anyone he wanted. The Sword Palace would not interfere. He could also contribute the modified cultivation method to the Sword Palace and receive a corresponding reward. After receiving the cultivation method, the pressure of the third level of the sword horde was too great. Chu Mu quickly left. When he walked out of the sword horde, he immediately let out a sigh of relief and quickly returned to the sword horde. Southern Dipper Mind Tempering Scripture. This was the cultivation method that cost 3,000 Sky Edge coins. Like mind-tempering skill, it was also a cultivation method that was directly related to mental strength. However, Southern Dipper Mind-Tempering Scripture was 2 levels higher than mind-tempering skill. Mind-tempering skill was only the foundation. It purely refined the mental strength and increased the strength. Southern Dipper Mind-Tempering Scripture could not only refine the mental strength and increase the strength of the mental strength, but also develop the potential of the mental strength and increase the amount of mental strength. Such a cultivation method was far superior to mind-tempering skill. Naturally, it was more complex and mysterious than mind-tempering skill. After Chu Mu returned to the sword horde, he walked into his bedroom and locked it. He sat cross-legged on the bed and began to carefully read and comprehend the information in his mind. First, he read it as a whole to have a clear and overall understanding of Southern Dipper Mind-Tempering Scripture. Mind-tempering skill operated the mental strength in the spiritual world to refine. It was slow and the effect was weak. Even so, it could double the strength of Chu Mu's unrefined mental strength. Southern Dipper Mind-Tempering Scripture was different. It used external forces to refine the mental strength. In the ancient world, there were hundreds of millions of stars. Some of these stars were close to each other, and some were very far away. The stars that were close to each other had a slight connection with each other, forming different patterns. Therefore, they were named. For example, the 7 stars sword formation originated from the Big Dipper, and the Southern Dipper was the same as the Big Dipper. The Big Dipper was for death, and the Southern Dipper was for life. The Southern Dipper's 6 stars were the Tianfu star, the Tianliang star, the Tianji star, the Tiantong star, the Tianxiang star, and the 7 killing star. The cultivation of Southern Dipper Mind-Tempering Scripture was to guide the power of the stars of the Southern Dipper's 6 stars to refine the mental strength. The Southern Dipper Mind-Tempering Scripture was divided into a total of 6 chapters. It could be divided into 6 stages, which were 6 levels, according to the Southern Dipper's 6 stars. The scripture mentioned that the symbol of cultivating the Southern Dipper Mind-Refining Scripture was to condense 6 stars in one's spiritual world. These 6 stars were the aggregation of one's spiritual will, and they were opposite to the 6 stars of the Southern Dipper in the immemorial star system. After reading it as a whole, Chu Mu began to understand it word by word. This was the process of sharpening the knife. Only when the knife was sharpened enough and fast enough could it cut firewood well and be more efficient. Even with Chu Mu's powerful comprehension, it took him an entire day to fully comprehend the Heavenly Treasury chapter of the Southern Dipper Mind Tempering Scripture. The cultivation of Southern Dipper Mind Tempering Scripture was done 1 chapter at a time. Therefore, once Chu Mu fully comprehended the Heavenly Treasury chapter, he began to cultivate it. The best time to cultivate Southern Dipper Mind Tempering Scripture was at night. This was because the power of the ancient star system was more obvious and clearer at night, and it was easier to sense. However, the sword tower had roofs and seals, which greatly weakened a swordsman's ability to sense the power of the ancient star system. Therefore, Chu Mu once again went to Sword Observation Peak. He randomly chose a relatively remote location. His goal was to go to the wilderness and obtain a better cultivation environment without any roofs or seals. After thinking about it, only a place like Sword Observation Peak was suitable in the Sky Edge Sword Palace. It was also not easy to be disturbed. Taking out a praying mat, Chu Mu sat down cross-legged and closed his eyes in contemplation. The various scriptures of the Southern Dipper Mind Tempering Scriptures Heavenly Treasury chapter once again flowed through his mind. Every word was a gem, and all kinds of mysteries were revealed. After comprehending it once, Chu Mu began to cultivate. Chapter 1 of the Southern Dipper Mind Tempering Scripture Heavenly Treasury chapter. All distracting thoughts were eliminated, and his spiritual intent was fully concentrated. It condensed into a wave that spread out from the top of his head to carefully sense the power of the stars that permeated the air. The cultivation of the Tianfu stars chapter naturally required one to sense the power of the Tianfu stars. Then, one had to use one's consciousness to guide the power of the Tianfu stars into one's spiritual world and temper one's consciousness. Often, swordsmen who cultivated the Southern Dipper Mind Tempering Scripture for the first time would be stuck at this stage for a very long time. This was because the ancient star system was very, very far away from the surface of the ancient star system. Even though the power of the stars was incomparably strong, it would constantly weaken after such a long distance. Swordsmen with ordinary spiritual intent couldn't cultivate a cultivation method like the Southern Dipper Mind Tempering Scripture at all because their spiritual intent was too weak. They simply couldn't sense the faint power of the stars in the air. Even with Chu Mu's tyrannical spiritual intent, he couldn't sense it for the time being. Very quickly, 15 minutes passed. Chu Mu still didn't sense any fluctuations of the power of the stars in the heavenly treasury. However, he wasn't anxious at all. His expression didn't change, and he was as cold as water. He closed his eyes and continued to extend his spiritual intent into the sky. Sensing for the first time was the most difficult. Many people knew this, including Chu Mu himself. The more impatient one was, the harder it would be to sense it. Chu Mu knew this very well. Thus, he didn't panic and was very calm. Since it was difficult to sense the fluctuations of the stars at such a low altitude, then he would extend his spiritual intent into the sky and carefully sense it. The higher he went, the denser the power of the stars in the air. Chu Mu's spiritual intent was very powerful, far surpassing the average swordsman's. Its purity was also very high. Although it could only cover a range of 100 meters, when condensed into a single strand, it could be 10 times stronger. In other words, when Chu Mu's spiritual intent was condensed into a strand, it could extend to a range of 1,000 meters. Very quickly, Chu Mu's spiritual intent spread to the extreme. He began to sense the power of the stars in the heavenly treasury at 1,000 meters in the air. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation.